Hi, welcome back to Storytime. So right now we are reading the fourth book in... Hi, John. How are you doing? Good to see you. We're reading the fourth book in the Wizard of Oz series, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. It's going all right. How's the smoke situation for you in your neck of the woods? Yeah, here it has been, we've had some clear days. It's not nearly as bad. Oh, yeah. Yeah, agreed. Here, too. Yeah, it was really nice on, I think it was Thursday. It was really nice and clear, at least in the morning. And then, the smoke started to roll in. But it was nice waking up to some clouds in the sky. Even though they didn't precipitate, it was nice to see the clouds. How are you doing, by the way? How was your weekend? I'm glad I get to use this Wizard of Oz drawing that I did. Oh, and you, I believe you voted in the poll. Let me check. Yeah, you did. Excellent. It's amazing. We're at an 8-way tie. Nice. I like that. Just kind of chilling at home. That's my idea of a really great weekend. Thank you. Yeah, that was the first one that I did where I really started to get a feel for the textures, started to play around with those in GIMP. Because, I did a couple of other ones, and they were all right, but this one is the first one that I've felt really satisfied with. So I'm excited I get to use it again. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. We might run a little bit late with this one. Oh, hang on a second. Oh, hi, Penguin. I was just thinking about you today. I haven't seen you in a while. What have you been up to? Yeah, it has. Have you been busy with work, or have you been on vacation or something? Oh, okay. Well, I hope things are going all right now. Yeah, I was just thinking about you the last couple of days. Oh no. How's how's her situation going? I hope she's gonna be okay. At stage 3, wow, that's pretty advanced. Yeah, well, don't work yourself too hard. But yeah, I really hope that everything goes okay. Please give her my best. And let's see. It didn't do that. Maybe this way. There we go. Yeah, oh, that's rough. You're welcome. Yeah, as you can see, since last time, I have been adding things on Nightbot, so we have a lot of commands, which I'm excited about. And also, yeah. Yeah, I understand about the trickiness of insurance, right? Oh, wow. Hello, 5 viewers. Right now, I don't really quite make enough to go on the good insurance. I am on Medi-Cal, which, I mean, it's nice because, it does cover some things, but there are other things where I have to drive an hour and a half to get to the nearest place that takes that insurance. So, it's a little tricky. I'm hoping that I've been making enough this year to be able to get back on the good insurance. Well, anyways, I'm going to go ahead and get started since, we're already 6 minutes in, but that's fine. I don't mind chatting with you. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is the second and final half of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, and of course the first half is up on the YouTube. Might go a little long because it's a little longer than the first half, but we'll see how far we can make it. Chapter 9. They Fight the Invisible Bears. The strangers took their seats at the table willingly enough, for they were all hungry, and the platters were now heaped with good things to eat. In front of each place was a plate bearing one of the delicious dama fruit, and the perfume that rose from these was so enticing and sweet that they were sorely tempted to eat them and become invisible. But Dorothy satisfied her hunger with other things, and her companions did likewise, resisting the temptation. "Why do you not eat the damas?" asked the woman's voice. "We don't want to get invisible," answered the girl. "But if you remain visible, the bears will see you and devour you," said the girlish young voice. That belonged to one of the children. "We who live here much prefer to be invisible, for we can still hug and kiss one another, and are quite safe from the bears." "And we do not have to be so particular about our dress," remarked the man. "And Mama can't tell whether my face is dirty or not," added the other childish voice gleefully. "But I make you wash it every time I think of it," said the mother, "for it stands to reason your face is dirty, Yanu, whether I can see it or not." Dorothy laughed and stretched out her hands. "Come here, please, Yanu, and your sister, and let me feel of you," she suggested. They came to her willingly, and Dorothy passed her hands over their faces and forms and decided one was a girl of about her own age, and the other was a boy somewhat smaller. The girl's hair was soft and fluffy, and her skin as smooth as satin. When Dorothy gently touched her nose and ears and lips, they seemed to be well and delicately formed. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know why the echo happens. I don't have it so that it's playing the desktop. I have noticed that a little bit. Let's see. "If I could see you, I'm sure you would be beautiful," she declared. The girl laughed, and her mother said, "We are not vain in the valley of the Boa, because we cannot display our beauty, and good actions and pleasant ways are what make us lovely to our companions. Yet we can see and appreciate the beauties of nature, the dainty flowers and trees, the green fields, and the clear blue sky." That's interesting. "Now about the birds and beasts and fishes," asked Zeb. "The birds we cannot see because they love to eat of the dama as much as we do. Yet we hear their sweet songs and enjoy them. Neither can we see the cruel bears, for they also eat the fruit. But the fishes that swim in our brooks we can see, and often we catch them to eat." "It occurs to me you have a great deal to make you happy, even while invisible," remarked the wizard. "Nevertheless, we prefer to remain visible while we are in the valley." Oh, okay. I switched it so that I'm facing the mic as opposed to facing the book, so maybe that helped. Thank you for the feedback, Penguin. Let's see. Just then Eureka came in, for she had been until now wandering outside with Jim, and when the kitten saw the table set with food, she cried out, "Now you must feed me, Dorothy, for I'm half starved." The children were inclined to be frightened by the sight of the small animal, which reminded them of the bears, but Dorothy reassured them by explaining that Eureka was a pet and could do no harm even if she wished to. Then, as the others had by this time moved away from the table, the kitten sprang upon the chair and put her paws upon the cloth to see what there was to eat. To her surprise, an unseen hand clutched her and held her suspended in the air. Eureka was frantic with terror and tried to scratch and bite, so the next moment she was dropped to the floor. "Did you see that, Dorothy?" she gasped. "Yes, dear," her mistress replied. "There are people living in this house, although you cannot see them. And you must have better manners, Eureka, or something worse will happen to you." She placed a plate of food upon the floor, and the kitten ate greedily. "Give me that nice-smelling fruit I saw on the table," she begged when she had cleaned the plate. "Those are damas," said Dorothy, "and you must never even taste them, Eureka, or you'll get invisible, and then we can't see you at all." The kitten gazed wistfully at the forbidden fruit. "Does it hurt to be invisible?" she asked. "I don't know," Dorothy answered, "but it would hurt me dreadfully to lose you." "Very well, I won't touch it," decided the kitten, "but you must keep it away from me, for the smell is very tempting." "Can you tell us, sir or ma'am," said the wizard, addressing the air because he did not quite know where the unseen people stood, "if there is any way we can get out of your beautiful valley on top of the earth again?" "Oh, one can leave the valley easily enough," answered the man's voice, "but to do so, you must enter a far less pleasant country. As for reaching the top of the earth, I have never heard that it is possible to do that, and if you succeed in getting there, you would probably fall off." "Oh, no," said Dorothy. "We've been there, and we know." "The Valley of the Boa is certainly a charming place," resumed the wizard, "but we cannot be contented in any other land than our own for long. Even if we should see the unpleasant places on our way, it is necessary, in order to reach the earth's surface, to keep moving on towards it." "In that case," said the man, "it would be best for you to cross our valley and mount the spiral staircase inside the Pyramid Mountain. The top of that mountain is lost in the clouds, and when you reach it, you will be in the awful land of Nod, where the gargoyles live." "What are gargoyles?" asked Zeb. "I do not know, young sir. Our greatest champion, Overman Anu, once climbed the spiral stairway and fought 9 days with the gargoyles before he could escape them and come back, but he could never be induced to describe the dreadful creatures, and soon afterward a bear caught him and ate him up." The wanderers were rather discouraged by this gloomy report, but Dorothy said with a sigh, "If the only way to get home is to meet the gurgles, then we've got to meet 'em. They can't be worse than the Wicked Witch or the Gnome King." "But you must remember you had the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman to help you conquer those enemies," suggested the wizard. "Just now, my dear, there is not a single warrior in your company." "Oh, I guess Zeb could fight if he had to, couldn't you, Zeb?" asked the little girl. "Perhaps, if I had to," answered Zeb dubiously. "And you have the jointed sword that you chopped the vegetable sorcerer in with, said the girl with to the little man. "True," he replied, "and in my satchel there are other useful things to fight with." "What the gargoyles must dread is a noise," said the man's voice. "Our champion told me that when he shouted his battle cry, the creatures shuddered and drew back, hesitating to continue the combat. But they were in great numbers, and the champion could not shout much because he had to save his breath for fighting." "Very good," said the wizard. "We can all yell better than we can fight, so we ought to defeat the gargoyles." "But tell me," said Dorothy, "how did such a brave champion happen to let the bears eat him? And if he was invisible and the bear is invisible, who knows that they really ate him up?" "The champion had killed 11 bears in his time," returned the unseen man. "And we know this is true because when any creature is dead, the invisible charm of the Dama fruit ceases to be active, and the slain one can be plainly seen by all eyes. When the champion killed a bear, everyone could see it, and when the bears killed the champion, we all saw several pieces of him scattered about, which of course disappeared again when the bears devoured them. They now bade farewell to the kind but unseen people of the cottage, and after the man had called their attention to a high pyramid-shaped mountain on the opposite side of the valley, and told them how to travel in order to reach it, they again started upon their journey. They followed the course of a broad stream and passed several more pretty cottages, but of course they saw no one, nor did anyone speak to them. Fruits and flowers grew plentifully all about, and there were many of the delicious damas that the people of Voa were so fond of. About noon they stopped to allow Jim to rest in the shade of a pretty orchard, and while they plucked and ate some of the cherries and plums that grew there, a soft voice suddenly said to them, "There are bears nearby, be careful." The wizard got out his sword at once, and Zeb grabbed the horsewhip. Dorothy climbed into the buggy, although Jim had been unharnessed from it and was grazing some distance away. The owner of the unseen voice laughed lightly and said, "You cannot escape the bears that way." How can we escape?" asked Dorothy, nervously, for an unseen danger is always the hardest to face. "You must take to the river," was the reply. "The bears will not venture upon the river." "But we would be drowned!" exclaimed the girl. "Oh, there's no need of that," said the voice, from which its gentle tones seemed to belong to a young girl. "You are strangers in the valley of Voa, and do not seem to know our way, so I will try to save you." The next moment a broad-leaved plant was jerked from the ground, where it grew and held suspended in the air before the wizard. "Sir," said the voice, "you must rub these leaves upon the soles of your feet, and then you will be able to walk upon the water without sinking below the surface. It is a secret the bears do not know, and we people of Voa usually walk upon the water when we travel, and so escape our enemies." "Thank you!" cried the wizard joyfully, and at once rubbed a leaf upon the soles of Dorothy's shoes, and then upon his own. The girl took a leaf and rubbed it upon the kitten's paws, and the rest of the plant was handed to Zeb, who, after applying it to his own feet, carefully rubbed it upon all four of Jim's hoofs, and then upon the tires of the buggy wheels. He had nearly finished this last task when a low growling was suddenly heard, and the horse began to jump around and kick viciously with its heels. "Quick, to the water, or you are lost!" cried their unseen friend, and without hesitation the wizard drew the buggy down the bank and out upon the broad river. For Dorothy was still seated in it with Eureka in her arms. They did not sink at all owing to the virtues of the strange plant they had used, and when the buggy was in the middle of the stream, the wizard returned to the bank to assist Zeb and Jim. The horse was plunging madly about, and 2 or 3 deep gashes appeared upon its flanks, from which the blood flowed freely. "Run for the river!" shouted the wizard, and Jim quickly freed himself from his unseen tormentors by a few vicious kicks, and then obeyed. As soon as he trotted out upon the surface of the river, he found himself safe from pursuit, and Zeb was already running across the water towards Dorothy. As the little wizard turned to follow them, he felt a hot breath upon his cheek and heard a low, fierce growl. At once he began stabbing at the air with his quick sword. Oh, no, that's not good. Let's see. At once he began stabbing at the air with his sword, and he knew that he had struck some substance, because when he drew back the blade it was dripping with blood. The third time that he thrust out the weapon, there was a loud roar and a fall, and suddenly at his feet appeared the form of a great red bear, which was nearly as big as the horse, and much stronger and fiercer. The beast was quite dead from the sword thrusts, and after a glance at its terrible claws and the sharp teeth, the little man turned in a panic and rushed out upon the river. For another menacing growl told him more bears were near. On the river, however, the adventurers seemed to be perfectly safe. Dorothy and the buggy had floated slowly down the stream with the current of the water, and the others made haste to join her. The wizard opened his satchel and got out some sticking plaster with which he mended the cuts Jim had received from the claws of the bear. Oh no, I'm using headphones, don't worry. I definitely don't want any feedback, so that's, yeah, I use earbuds. I think we'd better stick to the river after this, said Dorothy. If our unknown friend hadn't warned us and told us what to do, we would all be dead by this time. That is true, agreed the wizard, and as the river seemed to be flowing in the direction of the Pyramid Mountain, it will be the easiest way for us to travel. Yeah, I'm not sure either. My sister and I were thinking of getting me a snowball one of these days, so I'll definitely be looking into that. Though, of course, I also need to get a webcam that actually works. Zeb hitched Jim to the buggy again, and the horse trotted along and drew them rapidly over the smooth water. The kitten was at first dreadfully afraid of getting wet, but Dorothy let her down, and soon Eureka was frisking along beside the buggy without being scared a bit. Once a little fish swam too near the surface, and the kitten grabbed it in her mouth and ate it up as quick as a wink. But Dorothy cautioned her to be careful what she ate in this valley of enchantments, and no more fishes were careless enough to swim within reach. After a journey of several hours, they came to a point where the river curved, and they found they must cross a mile or so of the valley before they came to the Pyramid Mountain. There were few houses in this part, a few orchards or flowers. So our friends feared they might encounter more of the savage bears, which they had learned to dread with all their hearts. "You'll have to make a dash, Jim," said the wizard, "and run as fast as you can go." "All right," answered the horse. "I'll do my best, but you must remember I'm old, and my dashing days are past and gone. All three got into the buggy, and Zeb picked up the reins, though Jim needed no guidance of any sort. The horse was still smarting from the sharp claws of the invisible bear, and as soon as he was on land and headed toward the mountain, the thought that more of those fearsome creatures might be near acted as a spur and sent him galloping along in a way that made Dorothy catch her breath. Then Zeb, in a spirit of mischief, uttered a growl like that of the bears, and Jim pricked up his ears and fairly flew. His bony legs moved so fast they could scarcely be seen, and the wizard clung fast to the seat and yelled, "Whoa!" at the top of his voice. I'm afraid he's running away," gasped Dorothy. "I know he is," said Zeb, "but no bear can catch him if he keeps up that gait, and the harness of the buggy won't break." Jim did not make a mile a minute, but almost before they were aware of it, he drew up at the foot of the mountain so suddenly that the wizard and Zeb both sailed over the dashboard and landed on the soft grass, where they rolled over several times before they stopped. Dorothy nearly went with them, but she was holding fast to the iron rail of the seat, and that saved her. She squeezed the kitten, though, until it screeched, and then the old cab horse made several curious sounds that led the little girl to suspect he was laughing at all of them. Chapter 10. The Braided Man of Pyramid Mountain. The mountain before them was sharp like a cone, and was so tall that its point was lost in the clouds. Directly facing the place where Jim had stopped was an arched opening leading to a broad stairway. The stairs were cut in the rock inside the mountain, and they were broad and not very steep because they circled around like a corkscrew, and at the arched opening where the flight began, the circle was quite big. At the foot of the stairs was a sign reading, "Warning! These steps lead to the land of the gargoyles. Danger! Keep out!" "I wonder how Jim is ever going to draw the buggy up so many stairs," said Dorothy gravely. "No trouble at all," declared the horse with a contemptuous neigh. "Still, I don't care to drag any passengers. You'll all have to walk." "Suppose the stairs get steeper," suggested Zeb doubtfully. "Then you'll have to boost the buggy wheels, that's all," answered Jim. "We'll try it anyway," said the wizard. "It's the only way to get out of the Valley of the Voa." So they began to ascend the stairs, Dorothy and the wizard first, Jim next, drawing the buggy, and then Zeb to watch that nothing happened to the harness. The light was dim, and soon they mounted into total darkness, so that the wizard was obliged to get out his lanterns to light the way. But this enabled them to proceed steadily until they came to a landing, where there was a rift in the side of the mountain that let in both light and air. Looking through this opening, they could see the valley of the Voa lying far below them, the cottages seeming like toy houses from that distance. After resting a few moments, they resumed their climb, and still the stairs were broad and low enough for Jim to draw the buggy easily after him. The old horse panted a little, and had to stop often to get his breath. At such times, they were all glad to wait for him, for continually climbing upstairs is sure to make one's legs ache. They wound about, always going upward, for some time. The lights from the lanterns dimly showed the way, but it was a gloomy journey, and they were pleased when a broad streak of light ahead assured them that they were coming to a second landing. Here one side of the mountain had a great hole in it, like the mouth of a cavern, and the stairs stopped at the edge near edge of the floor, and commenced descending again at the opposite edge. The opening in the mountain was on the side opposite of the valley of the Voa, and our travelers looked out upon a strange scene. Below them was a vast space, at the bottom of which was a black sea with rolling billows, through which little tongues of flame constantly shot up. Just above them, and almost on level with their platform, were banks of rolling clouds which constantly shifted position and changed color. The blues and grays were very beautiful, and Dorothy noticed that on the cloud banks sat or reclined fleecy, shadowy forms of beautiful beings who must have been the cloud fairies. Mortals who stand upon the earth and look up at the sky cannot often distinguish these forms, but our friends were now so near to the clouds that they observed the dainty fairies very clearly. "Are they real?" asked Zeb in an awed voice. "Of course," replied Dorothy softly. "They are the cloud fairies." "They seem like open work," remarked the boy, gazing intently. "If I should squeeze them, there wouldn't be anything left of it." In the open space between the clouds and the black, bubbling sea far beneath could be seen an occasional strange bird winging its way swiftly through the air. These birds were of enormous size and reminded Zeb of the rocks he had read about in the Arabian Nights. They had fierce eyes and sharp talons and beaks, and the children hoped none of them would venture into the cavern. "Well, I declare," suddenly exclaimed the little wizard, "what in the world is that?" They turned around and found a man standing on the floor in the center of the cave, who bowed very politely when he saw he had attracted their attention. He was a very old man, bent nearly double, but the queerest thing about him was his white hair and beard. These were so long that they reached to his feet, and both the hair and the beard were carefully plaited into many braids, and the end of each braid fastened with a bow of colored ribbons. "Where did you come from?" asked Dorothy wonderingly. "No place at all," answered the man with the braids. "That is, not recently. Once I lived on top of the earth, but for many years I have had my factory in this spot, halfway up Pyramid Mountain." "Are we only halfway up?" inquired the boy in a discouraged tone. "I believe so, my lad," replied the braided man. "But as I have never been in either direction, down or up, since I arrived, I cannot be positive whether it is exactly halfway or not." "Have you a factory in this place?" asked the wizard, who had been examining the strange personage carefully. "To be sure," said the other. "I am a great inventor, you must know, and I manufacture my products in this lonely spot." "What are your products?" inquired the wizard. "Well, I make assorted flutters for flags and bunting, and a superior grade of rustlers for ladies' silk gowns." "I thought so," said the wizard with a sigh. "May we examine some of these articles?"
"Yes, indeed. Come into my shop, please," said the braided man, and turned and led the way into the smaller cave where he evidently lived. Here, on a broad shelf, were several cardboard boxes of various sizes, each tied with cotton cord. "This," said the man, taking up a box and handing it gently, "contains 12 dozen rustles, enough to make last any lady a year. Will you buy it, my dear?" he asked, addressing Dorothy. "My gown isn't silk," she said, smiling. "Never mind. When you open the box, the rustles will escape whether you are wearing a silk dress or not," said the man seriously. Then he picked up another box. "In this," he continued, "are many assorted flutters. They are invaluable to make flags flutter on a still day when there is no wind. You, sir," turning to the wizard, "ought to have this assortment. Once you've tried my goods, I am sure you will never be without them." "I have no money with me," said the wizard evasively. "I do not want money," returned the braided man, "for I could not spend it in this deserted place if I had it. But I would very much like a blue hair ribbon. You will notice my braids are tied with yellow, pink, brown, red, green, white, and black, but I have no blue ribbons."
"I'll get you one," cried Dorothy, who was sorry for the poor man. So she ran back to the buggy and took from her suitcase a pretty blue ribbon. It did her good to see how the braided man's eyes sparkled when he received this treasure. "You made me very, very happy, my dear," he exclaimed, and then he insisted on the wizard taking the box of flutters, and the little girl accepted the box of rustles. "You may need them some time," he said. "There is really no use in my manufacturing these things unless somebody uses them." "Why did you leave the surface of the earth?" inquired the wizard. "I could not help it. It is a sad story, but if you will try to restrain your tears, I will tell you about it. On Earth, I was a manufacturer of imported holes for American Swiss cheese, and I will acknowledge that I supplied a superior article which was in great demand. Also, I made pores of porous plaster and high-grade holes for doughnuts and buttons. Finally, I invented a new adjustable post hole, which I thought would make my fortune. I manufactured a large quantity of these post holes, and having no room in which to store them, I set them all end to end and put the top one in the ground. That made an extraordinary long hole, as you can imagine, and reached far down into the earth, and as I leaned over it to try to see to the bottom, I lost my balance and tumbled in. Unfortunately, the hole led directly into this vast space you see outside this mountain, but I managed to catch a point of rock that projected from this cavern, and so saved myself from tumbling headlong into the black waves beneath, where the tongues of flame that dart out would certainly have consumed me. Here, then, I made my home, and although it is a lonely place, I amuse myself making rustles and flutters, and so get along very nicely." When the braided man had completed this strange tale, Dorothy nearly laughed, because it was all so absurd, but the wizard tapped his forehead significantly to indicate that he thought the poor man was crazy. So they politely bade him good day, and went back to the outer cavern to resume their journey. Chapter 11. They meet the wooden gargoyles. Another breathless climb brought our adventurers to a third landing, where there was a rift in the mountain. On peering out, they could all see a rolling banks of clouds so thick that they obscured all else. But the travelers were obliged to rest, and while they were sitting on the rocky floor, the wizard felt in his pocket and brought out the 9 tiny piglets. To his delight, they were now plainly visible, which proved that they had passed beyond the influence of the magical Valley of Voa. "Why, we can see each other again!" cried one joyfully. "Yes," sighed Eureka, "and I also can see you again, and the sight makes me dreadfully hungry. Please, Mr. Wizard, may I eat just one of the fat little piglets? You never miss one of them, I'm sure." "What a horrid savage beast!" exclaimed a piglet. "And after we've been such good friends, too, and played with one another." "When I'm not hungry, I love to play with you all," said the kitten demurely. But when my stomach is empty, it seems that nothing will fill it so nicely as a fat piglet."
"And we trusted you so," said another of the 9 reproachfully.
"And thought you were respectable," said another. "It seems we were mistaken," declared a third, looking at the kitten timorously. "No one with such murderous desires should belong to our party, I'm sure." "You see, Eureka," remarked Dorothy reprovingly, "you are making yourself disliked. There are certain things proper for a kitten to eat, but I never heard of a kitten eating a pig under any circumstances." "Did you ever see such little pigs before?" asked the kitten. "They are no bigger than mice, and I'm sure mice are proper for me to eat." "It isn't the bigness, dear, it's the variety," replied the girl. "These are Mr. Wizard's pets, just as you are my pet, and it wouldn't be any more proper for you to eat them than it would for Jim to eat you." "And that's just what I shall do if you don't let those little balls of pork alone," said Jim, glaring at the kitten with his round big eyes. "If you injure any one of them, I'll chew you up instantly." The kitten looked at the horse thoughtfully, as if trying to decide whether he meant it or not. "In that case," she said, "I'll leave them alone. You haven't many teeth left, Jim, but the few you have are sharp enough to make me shudder. So the piglets will be perfectly safe hereafter, as far as I'm concerned." "That is right, Eureka," remarked the wizard earnestly. "Let us all be a happy family and love one another." Eureka yawned and stretched herself. "Oh, I've always loved the piglets," she said, "but they don't love me." "No one can love a person he's afraid of," asserted Dorothy. "If you behave and don't scare the little pigs, I'm sure they'll grow very fond of you." The wizard now put the 9 tiny ones back into his pocket, and the journey was resumed. "We must be pretty near the top now," said the boy, as they climbed wearily up the dark, winding stairway. "The country of the Gurgles can't be far from the top of the earth," remarked Dorothy. "It isn't very nice down here. I'd like to get home again, I'm sure." No one replied to this, because they found they needed all their breath for the climb. The stairs had become narrower, and Zeb and the wizard often had to help Jim pull the buggy from one step to another, or keep it from jamming against the rocky walls. At last, however, a dim light appeared ahead of them, which grew clearer and stronger as they advanced. "Thank goodness we're nearly there," panted the little wizard. Jim, who was in advance, saw the last stair before him and stuck his head above the rocky sides of the stairway. Then he halted, ducked down, and began to back up so that he nearly fell with the buggy onto the others. "Let's go down again," he said in his hoarse voice. "Nonsense!" snapped the tired wizard. "What's the matter with you, old man?" "Everything," grumbled the horse. "I've taken a look at this place, and it's no fit country for real creatures to go to. Everything's dead up there. No flesh or blood or growing things anywhere." "Never mind, we can't turn back," said Dorothy, "and we don't intend to stay here anyhow." "It's dangerous," growled Jim in a stubborn tone. "See here, my good steed," broke in the wizard. "Little Dorothy and I have been in many queer countries in our travels, and always escaped without harm. We've even been to the marvelous land of Oz, haven't we, Dorothy? So we don't much care what the country of the gargoyles is like. Go ahead, Jim, and whatever happens, we'll make the best of it." "All right," answered the horse. "This is your excursion, not mine, so if you get into trouble, don't blame me." With this speech, he bent forwards and dragged the buggy up the remaining steps. The others followed, and soon they were all standing upon a broad platform and gazing at the most curious and startling sight their eyes had ever beheld. "The country of gargoyles is all wooden!" exclaimed Zeb, and so it was. The ground was sawdust, and the pebbles scattered around were hard knots from trees, worn smooth in course of time. There were odd wooden houses with carved wooden flowers in the front yards. The tree trunks were of coarse wood, but the leaves of the trees were shavings. The patches of grass were splinters of wood, and where neither grass nor sawdust showed was a solid wooden flooring. Wooden birds fluttered among the trees, and wooden crows were browsing upon the wooden grass. But the most amazing thing of all were the wooden people, the creatures known as gargoyles. These were very numerous, for the place was thickly inhabited, and a large group of the queer people clustered near, gazing sharply upon the strangers who had emerged from the long spiral stairway. The gargoyles were very small of stature, being less than 3 feet in height. Their bodies were round, their legs short and thick, and their arms extraordinarily long and stout. Their heads were too big for their bodies, and their faces were decidedly ugly to look upon. Some had long, curved noses and chins, some small eyes and wide, grinning mouths. Others had flat noses, protruding eyes, and ears that were shaped like those of an elephant. There were many types indeed, scarcely 2 being alike, but all were equally disagreeable in appearance. The tops of their head had no hair, but were carved into a variety of fantastic shapes, some having a row of points or balls around the top, other designs resembling flowers or vegetables, and still others having squares that looked like waffles cut crisscross on their heads. They all wore short wooden wings, which were fastened to their wooden bodies by means of wooden hinges with wooden screws, and with these wings they flew swiftly and noiselessly here and there, their legs being of little use to them. This noiseless motion was one of the most peculiar things about the gargoyles. They made no sounds at all, either in flying or trying to speak. They had conversed mainly by means of quick signals made with their wooden fingers or lips. Neither was there any sound to be heard anywhere throughout the wooden country. The birds did not sing. "Oh, hey, Swags, good to see you." The birds did not sing, nor did the cows moo, yet there was more than ordinary activity everywhere. The group of these queer creatures, which was discovered clustered near the stairs at first, remained staring and motionless, glaring with evil eyes at the intruders who had so suddenly appeared in their land. In turn, the wizard and the children, the horse and the kitten, examined the gargoyle with the same silent attention. "There's going to be trouble, I'm sure," remarked the horse. "Unhitch those tugs, Zeb, and let me free from the buggy, so I can fight comfortably." "Jim's right," sighed the wizard. "There's going to be trouble, and my sword isn't stout enough to cut up those wooden bodies, so I shall have to get out my revolvers." He got his satchel from the buggy, and, opening it, took out 2 deadly-looking revolvers that made the children shrink back in alarm just to look at. "What harm can the gurgles do?" asked Dorothy. "They have no weapons to hurt us with." "Each of their arms is a wooden club," answered the little man, "and I'm sure the creatures mean mischief, by the looks of their eyes. Even these revolvers can merely succeed in damaging a few of their wooden bodies, and after that we will be at their mercy." "But why fight at all in that case?" asked the girl. "So I may die with a clear conscience," returned the wizard gravely. "It's every man's duty to do the best he knows how, and I'm going to do it." "Wish I had an axe," said Zeb, who by now had unhitched the horse. "If we had known we were coming, we might have brought along several other useful things," responded the wizard. "But we dropped into this adventure rather unexpectedly." The gargoyles had backed away a distance when they heard the sound of talking. For although our friends had spoken in low tones, their words seemed loud in the silence surrounding them. But as soon as the conversation ceased, the grinning, ugly creatures arose in a flock and flew swiftly toward the strangers, their long arms stretched out before them like the bowsprits of a fleet of sailboats. The horse had especially attracted their notice, since it was the biggest and strangest creature they had ever seen, so it became the center of their first attack. But Jim was ready for them, and when he saw them coming, he turned his heels toward them and began kicking out as hard as he could. Crack! Crash!
Bang went his iron-shod hooves against the wooden bodies of the gargoyles, and they were battered right and left with such force that they scattered like straws in the wind. But the noise and clatter seemed as dreadful to them as Jim's heels, for all who were able swiftly turned and flew away to the great distance. The others picked themselves up from the ground one by one and quickly rejoined their fellows, so for a moment the horse thought he had won the fight with ease. But the wizard was not so confident. "Those wooden things are impossible to hurt," he said, "and all the damage Jim has done to them is to knock a few splinters from their noses and ears. That cannot make them look any uglier, I'm sure, and it is my opinion they will soon renew the attack." "What made them fly away?" asked Dorothy. "The noise, of course. Don't you remember how the champion escaped them by shouting his battle cry?" "Suppose we escape down the stairs, too," suggested the boy. "We have time just now, and I'd rather face the invisible bears than those wooden imps." "No," returned Dorothy stoutly. "It won't do to go back, for then we would never get home. Let's fight it out." "That is what I advise," said the wizard. "They haven't defeated us yet, and Jim is worth a whole army." But the gargoyles were clever enough not to attack the horse the next time. They advanced in a great swarm, having been joined by many more of their kind, and they flew straight over Jim's head to where the others were standing. The wizard raised one of his revolvers and fired into the throng of his enemies, and the shot resounded like a clap of thunder in that silent place. Some of the wooden beings fell flat upon the ground, where they quivered and trembled in every limb, but most of them managed to wheel and escape again to a distance. Zeb ran and picked up one of the gargoyles that lay nearest to him. The top of his head was carved with a crown, and the wizard's bullet had struck it exactly in the left eye, which had a hard wooden knot. Half the bullet stuck in the wood, and half stuck out, so it had been the jar and the sudden noise that had knocked the creature down, more than the fact that it was really hurt. Before this crowned gargoyle had recovered himself, Zeb had wound a strap several times around its body, confining its wings and arms so that it could not move. Then, having tied the wooden creature securely, the boy buckled in the straps and tossed his prisoner into the buggy. By that time, the others had all retired. "Hi, Corel, how are you doing?" "Oh, Penguin, I forgot to I'm between chapters, by the way. Penguin, I forgot to mention, I do still have 2 active polls in the Stream Polls channel in my Discord. One for which emotes we should choose, like the first 3 we should choose, and choose up to 3 of your favorites. And the other is for the December story times, if you would like both of the story times to be Christmas, or if we should do one Christmas and one non-Christmas. So don't forget to vote on those. Are you streaming later today, Swags? I know you usually start in about 45 minutes, I think. Oh, okay. Well, I'll definitely stop by then. I was thinking of doing a gaming stream after this, but I'm thinking of just playing it chill instead, so I'll probably host you. Oh, yeah, that's right. How's the volleyball going? Yeah, understandable. Oh, then I think you probably started like 9:30 my time? Or something like that. You're like an hour ahead of me, right? Yeah. I think you're on Mountain. I'm assuming you mean playing volleyball as opposed to watching volleyball. Ooh.
promising chapter title for this next chapter. So I'll reply after this chapter. Chapter 12, A Wonderful Escape. Nice. For a while the enemy hesitated to renew the attack. Then a few of them escaped until another shot from the wizard's revolver made them retreat. "That's fine," said Zeb. "We've got 'em on the run now, sure enough." "But only for a time," replied the wizard, shaking his head gloomily. "These revolvers are good for 6 shots each, but when those are gone, we shall be hopeless. Oh, helpless." The gargoyles seemed to realize this, for they sent a few of their band time after time to attack the strangers and draw the fire from the little man's revolver. In this way, none of them was shocked by the dreadful report from more than once, for the main band kept far away, and each time a new company was sent into battle. When the wizard had fired all of his 12 bullets, he had caused no damage to the enemy except to stun a few by the noise, and so he was no nearer to victory than in the beginning of the fray. "What shall we do now?" asked Dorothy anxiously. "Let's yell all together," said Zeb. "And fight at the same time," added the wizard. "We will get near Jim, so that he can help us, and each one must take some weapon and do the best he can. I'll use my sword, although it wasn't much account in this affair. Dorothy must take her parasol and open it suddenly when the wooden folks attack her. I haven't anything for you, Zeb." "I'll use the king," said the boy, and pulled his prisoner out of the buggy. The bound gargoyle's arms extended far out beyond its head, so by grasping its wrist, Zeb found the king made a very good club. The boy was strong for one of his years, having always worked upon a farm, so he was likely to prove more dangerous to the enemy than the wizard. When the next company of gargoyles advanced, our adventurers began yelling as if they had gone mad. Even the kitten gave a dreadfully shrill scream, and at the same time Jim the cab horse neighed loudly. This daunted the enemy for a time, but the defenders were soon out of breath. Perceiving this, as well as the fact that there were no more of the awful bangs to come from the revolvers, the gargoyles advanced in a swarm as thick as bees, so that the air was filled with them. Dorothy squatted upon the ground and put up her parasol, which nearly covered her and proved a great protection. The wizard's sword blade snapped into a dozen pieces at the first blow he struck against the wooden people. Zeb pounded away with a gargoyle he was using as a club until he had knocked down dozens of foes, but at the last they clustered so thickly about him that he no longer had room in which to swing his arms. The horse performed some wonderful kicking, and even Eureka assisted them when she leaped bodily upon the gargoyles and scratched and bit at them like a wild cat. But all this bravery amounted to nothing at all. The wooden things wound their long arms around Zeb and the wizard held them fast. Dorothy was captured in the same way, and numbers of the gargoyles clung to Jim's legs, so weighing him down that the poor beast was helpless. Eureka made a desperate dash to escape and scampered along the ground like a streak, but a grinning gargoyle flew after her and grabbed her before she had gone very far. All of them expected nothing less than instant death, but to their surprise the wooden creatures flew into the air with them and bore them far away over miles and miles of wooden country until they came to a wooden city. The houses of this city had many corners, being square and 6-sided and 8-sided. They were tower-like in shape, and the best of them seemed old and weather-worn, yet all were strong and substantial. To one of these houses, which had neither doors nor windows, but only one broad opening far up underneath the roof, the prisoners were brought by their captors. The gargoyles roughly pushed them into the opening, where there was a platform, and then flew away and left them. As they had no wings, the stranger could not fly away, and if they jumped down from such a height, they would surely be killed. The creatures had sense enough to reason that way, and the only mistake that they made was in supposing the earth people were unable to overcome such ordinary difficulties. Jim was wroth with the others, although it took a good many gargoyles to carry brought with the others.
although it took a good many gargoyles to carry the big beast through the air and land him on the high platform, and the buggy was thrust in after him because it belonged to the party, and the wooden folks had no idea what it was used for, or whether it was alive or not. When Eureka's captor had thrown the kitten after the others, the last gargoyle silently disappeared, leaving our friends to breathe freely once more. "Oh, what an awful fight," said Dorothy, catching her breath in little gasps. "Oh, I don't know," purred Eureka, smoothing her ruffled fur with her paw. "We didn't manage to hurt anybody, and nobody managed to hurt us." "Thank goodness we were together again, even if we are prisoners," sighed the little girl. "Wonder why they didn't kill us on the spot," remarked Zeb, who had lost his king in the struggle. "They are probably keeping us for some ceremony," the wizard answered reflectively. "But there is no doubt they intend to kill us as dead as possible in a short time." "As dead as possible would be pretty dead, wouldn't it?" asked Dorothy. "Yes, my dear, but we have no need to worry about that just now. Let us examine our prison and see what it is like." The space underneath the roof where they stood permitted them to see on all sides of the tall building, and they looked with much curiosity at the city spread out beneath them. Everything visible was made of wood, and the scene seemed stiff and extremely unnatural. From their platform a stair descended into the house, and the children and the wizard explored it after lighting a lantern to show them the way. Several stories of empty rooms rewarded their search, but nothing more, so after a time they came back to the platform again. Had there been any doors or windows in the lower rooms, or had not the boards of the house been so thick and stout, escape could have been easy, but to remain down below was like being in a cellar or the hold of a ship, and they did not like the darkness or the damp smell. In this country, as in all others they had visited underneath the earth's surface, there was no night, a constant and strong light coming from some unknown source. Looking out, they could see into some of the houses near them, where there were open windows in abundance, and were able to mark the forms of the wooden gargoyles moving about in their dwellings. "This seems to be their time to rest," observed the wizard. "All people need rest, even if they are made of wood, and as there is no night here, they select a certain time of the day in which to sleep or doze." "I feel sleepy myself," remarked Zeb, yawning. "Why, where's Eureka?" cried Dorothy suddenly. They all looked around, but the kitten was no place to be seen. "She's gone out for a walk," said Jim gruffly. "Where, on the roof?" asked the girl. "No, she just dug her claws into the wood and climbed down the sides of the house to the ground." "She couldn't climb down, Jim," said Dorothy. "To climb means to go up." "Who said so?" demanded the horse. "My school teacher said so, and she knows a lot, Jim." "To climb down is sometimes used as a figure of speech," remarked the wizard. "Well, this was a figure of a cat," said Jim, "and she went down anyhow, whether she climbed or crept." "Dear me, how careless Eureka is!" exclaimed the girl, much distressed. "The gurgles were getter for sure." "Ha ha!" chuckled the old cab horse. "They're not gurgles, little maid, they're gargoyles." "Never mind, they'll get Eureka whatever they're called." "No, they won't," said the voice of the kitten, and Eureka herself crawled over the edge of the platform and sat down quietly upon the floor. "Wherever have you been, Eureka?" asked Dorothy sternly. "Watching the wooden folks. They're too funny for anything, Dorothy. Just now they were all going to bed, and what do you think? They unhook the hinges of their wings and put them in a corner until they wake up again." "What, the hinges?" "No, the wings." "That," said Zeb, "explains why this house is used by them for a prison. If any of the gargoyles act badly and have to be put in jail, they're brought here and their wings unhooked and taken away from them until they promise to be good." The wizard had listened intently to what Eureka had said. "I wish we had some of those loose wings," he said. "Could we fly with them?" asked Dorothy. "I think so." If the gargoyles can unhook the wings and then the power. Oh, sorry. Let me start that again. I think so. If the gargoyles can unhook the wings, then the power to fly lies in the wings themselves and not in the wooden bodies of the people who wear them. So if we had the wings, we could probably fly as well as they do, at least while we are in their country and under the spell of its magic. But how would it help us to be able to fly? Questioned the girl. Come here, said the little man, and took her to one of the corners of the building. Do you see that big rock standing on the hillside yonder? He continued, pointing with his finger. Yes, it's a good way off, but I can see it, she replied. Well, inside that rock, which reaches up into the clouds, is an archway very much like the one we entered when we climbed the spiral stairway from the valley of the Voa. I'll get my spyglass, and then you can see it more plainly. He fetched a small but powerful telescope which had been in his satchel, and by its aid the little girl clearly saw the opening. Where does it lead to? She asked. That I cannot tell, said the wizard, but we cannot now be far below the earth's surface, and that entrance may lead to another stairway that will bring us on top of our world again, where we belong. So if we had the wings and could escape the gargoyles, we might fly to that rock and be saved. I'll get you the wings, said Zeb, who had thoughtfully listened to all this. That is, if the kitten will show me where they are. But how can you get down? Inquired the girl wonderingly. For answer, Zeb began to unfasten Jim's harness, strap by strap, and to buckle one piece to another until he had made a long leather strip that would reach to the ground. I can climb down that all right, he said. No, you can't, remarked Jim with a twinkle in his round eyes. You may go down, but you can only climb up. Well, I'll climb up when I get back then, said the boy with a laugh. Now, Eureka, you'll have to show me the way to those wings. You must be very quiet, warned the kitten, for if you make the least noise, the gargoyles will wake up. They can hear a pin drop. I'm not going to drop a pin, said Zeb. He had fastened one end of the strap to a wheel of the buggy, and now he let the line dangle over the side of the house. Be careful, cautioned Dorothy earnestly. I will, said the boy, and let himself slide over the edge. The girl and the wizard leaned over and watched Zeb work his way carefully downward, hand over hand, until he stood upon the ground below. Eureka clung with her claws to the wooden side of the house and let herself down easily. Then together they crept away to enter the low doorway of a neighboring dwelling. The watchers waited in breathless suspense until the boy again appeared, his arms now full of the wooden wings. When he came to where the strap was hanging, he tied the wings all in a bunch to the end of the line, and the wizard drew them up. Then the line was let down again for Zeb to climb up by. Eureka quickly followed him, and soon they were all standing together upon the platform with 8 of the much-prized wooden wings beside them. The boy was no longer sleepy, but full of energy and excitement. He put the harness together again and hitched Jim to the buggy. Then, with the wings' help, he tried to fasten some of the wings to the old cab-horse. It was no easy task, because half of each one of the hinges of the wings was missing, it being still fastened to the body of the gargoyle who had used it. However, the wizard went once more to his satchel, which seemed to contain a surprising variety of odds and ends, and brought out a spool of strong wire, by means of which they managed to fasten 4 of the wings to Jim's harness, 2 near his head and 2 near his tail. They were a bit wiggly, but secure enough if only the harness held together. The other 4 wings were then fastened to the buggy, 2 on each side, for the buggy must bear the weight of the children and the wizard as it flew through the air. These preparations had not consumed a great deal of time, but the sleeping gargoyles were beginning to wake up and move around, and soon some of them would be hunting for their missing wings. So the prisoners resolved to leave their prison at once. They mounted into the buggy, Dorothy holding Eureka safe in her lap. The girl sat in the middle of the seat, with Zeb and the wizard on each side of her. When all was ready, the boy shook the reins and said, "Fly away, Jim!" "Which wings must I flop first?" asked the cab horse undecidedly. "Flap them all together," suggested the wizard. "Some of them are crooked," objected the horse. "Never mind, we will steer with the wings on the buggy," said Zeb. "Just you light out and make for that rock, Jim. Don't waste any time about it either." So the horse gave a groan, flopped its forewings all together, and flew away from the platform. Dorothy was a little anxious about the success of their trip, for the way Jim arched his long neck and spread out his bony legs as he fluttered and floundered through the air was enough to make anybody nervous. He groaned, too, as if frightened, and the wings creaked dreadfully because the wizard had forgotten to oil them, but they kept fairly good time with the wings of the buggy, so they had made excellent progress from the start. The only thing that anyone could complain of with justice was the fact that they wobbled first up and then down, as if the road were rocky instead of being as smooth as the air could make it. The main point, however, was that they flew, and flew swiftly, if a bit unevenly, toward the rock for which they had headed. Some of the gargoyles saw them presently and lost no time in collecting a band to pursue the escaping prisoners, so that when Dorothy happened to look back, she saw them coming in a great cloud that almost darkened the sky. Chapter 13. The Den of the Dragonettes. Our friends had a good start and were able to maintain it, for with their 8 wings they could go just as fast as could the gargoyles. All the way to the great rock the wooden people followed them, and when Jim finally alighted to the mouth of the cavern, the pursuers were still some distance away. "But I'm afraid they'll catch us yet," said Dorothy, greatly excited. "No, we must stop them," declared the wizard. "Quick, Zeb! Help me pull off these wooden wings." They tore off the wings, for which they had no further use, and the wizard piled them in a heap just outside the entrance to the cavern. Then he poured over them all the kerosene oil that was left in his oil can, and lighting a match, set fire to the pile. The flames leaped up at once, and the bonfire began to smoke and roar and crackle just as the great army of wooden gargoyles arrived. The creatures drew back at once, being filled with fear and horror, for such a dreadful thing as a fire they had never before known in all the history of their wooden land. That sounds like California in the summer. Inside the archway were several doors leading to different rooms built into the mountain, and Zeb and the wizard lifted their wooden doors from their hinges and tossed them all on the flames. "That will prove a barrier for some time to come," said the little man, smiling pleasantly all over his wrinkled face at the success of their stratagem. "Perhaps the flames will set fire to all that miserable wooden country, and if it does, the loss will be very small and the gargoyles will never be missed. But come, my children, let us explore the mountain and discover which way we must go in order to escape from this cavern, which is getting to be almost as hot as a bake-oven." To their disappointment, there was within this mountain no regular flight of steps by means of which they could mount to the earth's surface. A sort of inclined tunnel led them upward for a way, and they found the floor of it both rough and steep. Then a sudden turn brought them to a narrow gallery, where the buggy could not pass. This delayed and bothered them for a while, because they did not wish to leave the buggy behind them. It carried their baggage and was useful to ride in whenever there were good roads, and since it had accompanied them so far in their travels, they felt it their duty to preserve it. So Zeb and the wizard set to work and took off the wheels and the top, and then they put the buggy edgewise so that it could take up the smallest space. In this position they managed, with the aid of the patient cab horse, to drag the vehicle through the narrow part of the passage. It was not a great distance, fortunately, and when the path grew broader, they put the buggy together again and proceeded more comfortably. But the road was nothing more than a series of rifts or cracks in the mountain, and it went zigzag in every direction, slanting first up and then down until they were puzzled as to whether they were any nearer to the top of the earth than when they had started hours before. "Anyhow," said Dorothy, "we've escaped those awful gurgles, and that's one comfort."
Probably the gargoyles are still busy trying to put out the fire, returned the wizard. But even if they succeed in doing that, it would be very difficult for them to fly amongst these rocks, so I'm sure we need fear them no longer. Once in a while, they would come to a deep crack in the floor, which made the way quite dangerous, but there was still enough oil in the lantern to give them light, and the cracks were not so wide, but that they were able to jump over them. Sometimes they had to climb over heaps of loose rock where Jim could scarcely drag the buggy. At such times, Dorothy, Zeb, and the wizard all pushed behind and lifted the wheels over the roughest places, so they managed, by dint of hard work, to keep going. But the little party was both weary and discouraged when at last, on turning a sharp corner, the wanderers found themselves in a vast cave arching high over their heads and having a smooth, level floor. The cave was circular in shape, and all round its edge, near to the ground, appeared groups of dull yellow lights, 2 of them being always side by side. These were motionless at first, but soon began to flicker more brightly and to sway slowly from side to side and then up and down. "What sort of place is this?" asked the boy, trying to see more clearly through the gloom. "I cannot imagine, I'm sure," answered the wizard, also peering about. "Whoa!" snarled Eureka, arching her back until her hair stood straight on the end. "It's a den of alligators or crocodiles or some other dreadful creatures. Don't you see their terrible eyes?" "Eureka sees better in the dark than we can," whispered Dorothy. "Tell us, dear, what do the creatures look like?" she asked, addressing her pet. "I simply can't describe 'em," answered the kitten, shuddering. "Their eyes are like pie plates and their mouths like coal scuttles, but their bodies don't seem very big." "Where are they?" inquired the girl. "They are in little pockets all around the edge of the cavern. Oh, Dorothy, you can't imagine what horrible things they are. They're uglier than the gargoyles." "Tut, tut, be careful how you criticize your neighbors," spoke a rasping voice nearby. "As a matter of fact, you are rather ugly-looking creatures yourselves, and I'm sure Mother has often told us we were the loveliest and prettiest things in all the world." Hearing these words, our friends turned in the direction of the sound, and the wizard held his lantern so that their bright light would flood one of the little pockets in the rock. "Why, it's a dragon!" he exclaimed. "No," answered the owner of the big yellow eyes which were blinking at them so steadily. "You are wrong about that. We hope to grow to be dragons some day, but just now we're only dragonettes." "What's that?" asked Dorothy, gazing fearfully at the great scaly head, the yawning mouth, and the big eyes. "Young dragons, of course, but we are not allowed to call ourselves real dragons until we get our full growth," was the reply. "The big dragons are very proud and don't think children amount to much, but Mother says that someday we will all be very powerful and important." "Where is your mother?" asked the wizard, anxiously looking around. "She has gone up to the top of the earth to hunt for our dinner. If she has good luck, she will bring us an elephant, or a brace of rhinoceri, or perhaps a few dozen people to stay our hunger." "Oh, are you hungry?" inquired Dorothy, drawing back. "Very," said the dragonet, snapping its jaws. And do you eat people?" "To be sure, when we can get them, but they've been very scarce for a few years, and we usually have to be content with elephants or buffaloes," answered the creature in a regretful tone. "How old are you?" inquired Zeb, who stared at the yellow eyes as if fascinated. "Quite young, I grieve to say, and all of my brothers and sisters that you see here are practically my own age. If I remember rightly, we are 66 years old the day before yesterday." "But that isn't young," cried Dorothy in amazement. "No?" drawled the dragonet. "Seems to me very babyish." "How old is your mother?" asked the girl. "Mother's about 2,000 years old, but she carelessly lost track of her age a few centuries ago and skipped several hundred. She's a little fussy, you know, and afraid of growing old, being a widow and still in her prime." "I should think she would be," agreed Dorothy. Then after a moment's thought, she asked, "Are we
friends or enemies? I mean, will you be good to us, or do you intend to eat us? As for that, we dragonettes would love to eat you, my child, but unfortunately Mother has tied all our tails around rocks at the back of our individual caverns, so that we cannot crawl out to get you. If you choose to come nearer, we will make a mouthful of you in a wink, but unless you do, you will remain quite safe. There was a regretful accent in the creature's voice, and at the words all the other dragonettes sighed dismally. Dorothy felt relieved. Presently she asked, "Why did your mother tie her tails?" "Oh, she's sometimes gone for several weeks on her hunting trips, and if we are not tied, we would crawl all over the mountains and fight with each other and get into a lot of mischief. Mother usually knows what she is about, but she made a mistake this time, for you are sure to escape us unless you come too near, and you probably won't do that." "No, indeed," said the little girl. "We don't wish to be eaten by such awful beasts." "Permit me to say," returned the dragonette, "that you are quite unpolite to call us names, knowing that we cannot resent your insults. We consider ourselves very beautiful in appearance, for Mother has told us so, and she knows. And we are all of an excellent family and have a pedigree that I challenge any human to equal, as it extends back about 20,000 years to the time of the great green dragons of Atlantis, who lived in a time when humans had not yet been created. Can you match that pedigree, little girl?" "Well," said Dorothy, "I was born on a farm in Kansas, and I guess that's being just as spectable and haughty as living in a cave with your tail tied to a rock. If it isn't, I'll have to stand, that's all." "Tastes differ," murmured the dragonette, slowly drooping its scaly eyelids over its yellow eyes until they looked like half-moons. Being reassured by the fact that the creatures could not crawl out of their rock pockets, the children and the wizard now took time to examine them more closely. The heads of the dragonettes were as big as barrels and covered with hard greenish scales that glittered brightly under the light of the lanterns. The front legs, which grew just back of their heads, were also strong and big, but their bodies were smaller around than their heads, and dwindled away in a long line until their tails were slim as a shoestring. Dorothy thought if it had taken them 66 years to grow to this size, that it would be fully 100 years before they could hope to call themselves dragons, and that seemed like a good while to wait to grow up. "It occurs to me," said the wizard, "that we ought to get out of this place before the mother dragon comes back." "Don't hurry," called one of the dragonettes. "Mother will be glad to meet you, I'm sure." "You may be right," replied the wizard, "but we're a little particular about associating with strangers. Will you kindly tell us which way your mother went to get on the top of the earth?" "That is not a fair question to ask us," declared another dragonette. "For if we told you truly, you might escape us altogether, and if we told you an untruth, we would be naughty and deserve to be punished." "Then," decided Dorothy, "we must find our way out the best we can." They circled all around the cavern, keeping a good distance away from the blinking yellow eyes of the dragonettes, and presently discovered that there were two paths leading from the wall opposite to the place where they had entered. They selected one of these at a venture, and hurried along it as fast as they could go, for they had no idea when the mother dragon would be back, and were very anxious not to make her acquaintance. I see we have quite a few people in chat. It's good to see you all. I hope you're enjoying the story. These Oz stories get stranger and stranger, I must say. Chapter 14. Ozma uses a magic belt. For a considerable distance, the way led straight upward in a gentle incline, and the wanderers made such good progress that they grew hopeful and eager, thinking that they might see sunshine at any minute. But at length they came unexpectedly upon a huge rock that shut off the passage and blocked them from proceeding a single step farther. This rock was separate from the rest of the mountains. and was in motion, turning slowly around and around as if upon a pivot. When first they came to it, there was a solid wall before them, but presently it revolved until there was exposed a wide, smooth path across it to the other side. This appeared so unexpectedly that they were unprepared to take advantage of it at first, and allowed the rocky wall to swing around again before they had decided to pass over. But they knew now that there was a means of escape, and so waited patiently until the path appeared for the second time. The children and the wizard rushed across the moving rock and sprang into the passage below, landing safely through though a little out of breath. Jim the cab horse came last, and the rocky wall almost caught him, for just as he leaped to the floor of the further passage, the wall swung across it, and a loose stone that the buggy wheels knocked against fell into the narrow cracks where the rock turned, and became wedged there. They heard a crunching, grinding sound, a loud snap, and the turntable came to a stop with its broadest surface shutting off the path from which they had come. "Never mind," said Zeb. "We don't want to get back anyhow." "I'm not so sure of that," returned Dorothy. "The mother dragon may come down and catch us here." "It is possible," agreed the wizard, "if this proves to be the path she usually takes, but I have been examining this tunnel, and I do not see any signs of so large a beast having passed through it." "Then we're all right," said the girl, "for if the dragon went the other way, she can't possibly get to us now." "Of course not, my dear, but there is another thing to consider. The mother dragon probably knows the road to the earth's surface, and if she went the other way, then we have come the wrong one," said the wizard thoughtfully. "Dear me!" cried Dorothy. "That would be unlucky, wouldn't it?" "Very. Unless this passage also leads to the top of the earth," said Zeb. "For my part, if we manage to get out of here, I'll be glad it isn't the way the dragon goes." "So will I," returned Dorothy. "It's enough to have your pedigree flung in your face." "Oh, hey, Kickin', good to see you." It's enough to have your pedigree flung in your face by those saucy dragonettes. No one knows what the mother might do." They now moved on again, creeping slowly up another steep incline. The lanterns were beginning to grow dim, and the wizard poured the remaining oil from one into the other, so that the one light would last longer. But their journey was almost over, for in a short time they reached a small cave from which there was no further outlet. It's going good. Let's see. Oh, goodness. Oh, wow. Doubled the work. I'm sorry to hear that, Kickin', but I'm glad to see you. They did not realize their ill fortune at first, for their hearts were gladdened by the sight of a ray of sunshine coming through a small crack in the roof of the cave, far overhead. That meant that their world, the real world, was not very far away, and that the succession of perilous adventures they had encountered had at last brought them near the earth's surface, which meant home to them. But when the adventurers looked more carefully around them, they discovered that they were in a strong prison from which there was no hope of escape. "But we're almost on Earth again," cried Dorothy, "for there's the sun, the most beautiful sun that shines." And she pointed eagerly at the crack in the distant roof. "Almost on Earth being there," said the kitten in a discontented tone. "Almost on Earth isn't being there. It wouldn't be possible for even me to get up to that crack, or even if I got there, or even it if I got there, or through it. Ah! It appears that the path ends here," announced the wizard gloomily. "There's no way to go back," added Zeb with a low whistle of perplexity. "I was sure it would come to this in the end," remarked the old cab horse. "Folks don't fall into the middle of the earth and then get back again to tell of their adventures. Not in real life. And the whole thing has been unnatural because that cat and I are both able to talk your language and to understand the words you say." "And so can the 9 tiny piglets," added Eureka. "Don't forget them, for I may have to cut them off, have to eat them after all." I've heard animals talk before, said Dorothy, and no harm came of it. Were you ever before shut up in a cave far under the earth with no way of getting out? Inquired the horse seriously. No, answered Dorothy. But don't you lose heart, Jim, for I'm sure this isn't the end of our story by any means. The reference to the piglets reminded the wizard that his pet had not enjoyed much exercise lately and must be tired of their prison in his pocket. So he sat down upon the floor of the cave, brought the piglets out one by one, and allowed them to run around as much as they pleased. My dears, he said to them, I'm afraid I've gotten you into a lot of trouble, and that you will never again be able to leave this gloomy cave. What's wrong? Asked a piglet. We've been in the dark quite a while, and you may as well explain what has happened. The wizard told them of the misfortune that had overtaken the wanderers. Well, said another piglet, you are a wizard, are you not? I am, replied the little man. Then you can do a few whizzes and get us out of this hole, declared the tiny one with much confidence. I could if I happened to be a real wizard, returned the master sadly, but I'm not my piggy ways. I am a humbug wizard. Nonsense, cried several of the piglets together. You can ask Dorothy, said the little man in an injured tone. It's true enough, returned the girl earnestly. Our friend Oz is merely a humbug wizard, for he once proved it to me. He can do several very wonderful things, if he knows how. But he can't do a single thing if he hasn't the tools and machinery to work with. Thank you, my dear, for doing me justice, responded the wizard gratefully. To be accused of being a real wizard when I'm not is a slander I will not tamely submit to. But I am one of the greatest humbug wizards that ever lived, and you will realize this when we have all starved together and our bones are scattered over the floor in this lonely cave. I'm glad to hear that, Kingen. I don't believe we'll realize anything when it comes to that, remarked Dorothy, who had been deep in thought. But I'm not going to scatter my bones just yet, because I need them, and you probably need yours too. We are helpless to escape, sighed the wizard. We may be helpless, answered Dorothy, smiling at him, but there are others who can do more than we can. Cheer up, friends. I'm sure Ozma will help us. Ozma? Exclaimed the wizard. Who is Ozma? The girl that rules the marvelous land of Oz, was the reply. She's a friend of mine, for I met her in the land of Ev not long ago, and went to Oz with her. For a second time? Asked the wizard with great interest. Yes, the first time I went to Oz, I found you there ruling the Emerald City. After you went up in the balloon and escaped us, I got back to Kansas by means of a pair of magical silver shoes. I remember those shoes, said the little man, nodding. They once belonged to a wicked witch. Have you them here with you? No, I lost them somewhere in the air, explained the girl. But the second time I went to the land of Oz, I owned the Gnome King's magical belt, which is much more powerful than were the silver shoes. Where is that magic belt? Inquired the wizard, who had listened with great interest. Ozma has it, for its powers won't work in a common, ordinary country like the United States. Anyone in a fairy country like the land of Oz can do anything with it. So I left it with my friend, the Princess Ozma, who used it to wish me in Australia with Uncle Henry. And were you? Asked Zeb, astonished at what he had heard. Of course, in just a jiffy. And Ozma has an enchanted picture hanging in her room that shows her the exact scene where any of her friends may be at any time she chooses. All she has to do is say, I wonder what so-and-so is doing, and at once the picture shows where her friend is and what the friend is doing. It's real magic, Mr. Wizard, isn't it? Well, every day at 4 o'clock, Ozma has promised to look at me in that picture, and if I am in need of help, I am to make her a certain sign, and she will put on the Gnome King's magic belt and wish me to be with her in Oz. Do you mean that Princess Ozma will see this cave in her enchanted picture and see all of us here and what we are doing? Demanded Zeb. Of course, when it is 4 o'clock, she replied with a laugh at his startled expression. And when you make a sign, she will bring you to her in the land of Oz, continued the boy. That's it exactly, by means of the magic belt. Then, said the wizard, you will be saved, little Dorothy, and I am very glad of it. The rest of us will die much more cheerfully when we know you have escaped our sad fate. I won't die cheerfully, protested the kitten. There's nothing cheerful about dying that I could ever see, although they say a cat has 9 lives and so must die 9 times. Have you ever died yet? Inquired the boy. No, and I'm not anxious to begin, said Eureka. Don't worry, dear, Dorothy exclaimed. I'll hold you in my arms and take you with me. Take us too, cried the 9 tiny piglets, all in one breath. Perhaps I can, answered Dorothy. I'll try. Couldn't you manage to hold me in your arms? Asked the cab horse. Dorothy laughed. I'll do better than that, she promised, for I can easily save you all once I am myself in the land of Oz. How? They asked. By using the magic belt. All I need to do is wish you with me, and there you'll be, safe in the royal palace. Good, cried Zeb. I built that palace in the Emerald City, too, remarked the wizard in a thoughtful tone. And I'd like to see them again, for I was very happy among the Munchkins and the Winkies and the Quadlings and the Gillikins. Who are they? Asked the boy. The 4 nations that inhabit the land of Oz, was the reply. I wonder if they would treat me nicely if I went there again. Of course they would, declared Dorothy. They are still proud of their former wizard, and often speak of you kindly. Do you happen to know whatever became of the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow? He inquired. They live in Oz yet, said the girl, and are very important people. And the Cowardly Lion? Oh, he lives there too, with his friend the Hungry Tiger, and Billina is there, because she likes the place better than Kansas and wouldn't go with me to Australia. I'm afraid I don't know the Hungry Tiger and Billina, said the wizard, shaking his head. Is Billina a girl? No, she's Yellow Hen and a great friend of mine. You're sure to like Billina when you know her, asserted Dorothy. Your friends sound like a menagerie, remarked Zeb uneasily. Couldn't you wish me in some safer place than Oz? Don't worry, replied the girl. You'll just love the folks in Oz when you get acquainted. What time is it, Mr. Wizard? The little man looked at his watch, a big silver one that he carried in his vest pocket. 3:30, he said. Then we must wait for half an hour, she continued. But it won't take long after that to carry us all to the Emerald City. They sat silently thinking for a time. Then Jim suddenly asked, Are there any horses in Oz? Only one, replied Dorothy, and he's a sawhorse. A what? A sawhorse. Princess Ozma once brought him to life with a witch powder when she was a boy. Was Ozma once a boy? Asked Zeb wonderingly. Yes, a wicked witch enchanted her so she could not rule her kingdom. But she's a girl now, and the sweetest, loveliest girl in all the world. A sawhorse is a thing they saw a sawhorse is a thing they saw boards on, remarked Jim with a sniff. It is when it's not alive, acknowledged the girl. But this sawhorse can trot as fast as you can, Jim, and he's very wise, too. Pah! I'll race the miserable wooden donkey any day in the week, cried the cab horse. Dorothy did not reply to that. She felt that Jim would know more about the sawhorse later on. The time dragged wearily enough to the eager watchers, but finally the wizard announced that 4 o'clock had arrived, and Dorothy caught up the kitten and began to make the signal that had been agreed upon to the faraway, invisible Ozma. Nothing seems to happen, said Zeb doubtfully. We must give Ozma time to put on the magic belt, replied the girl. She had scarcely spoken the words when she suddenly disappeared from the cave, and with her went the kitten. There had been no sound of any kind and no warning. One moment Dorothy sat beside them with the kitten in her lap, and a moment later the horse, the piglets, the wizard, and the boy were all that remained in the underground prison. I believe we will soon follow her, announced the wizard in a tone of great relief, for I know something about the magic of the fairyland that is called the Land of Oz. Let us be ready, for we may be sent for any minute. He put the piglets safely away in his pocket again, and then he and Zeb got into the buggy and sat expectantly upon the seat. Will it hurt? Asked the boy in a voice that trembled a little. Not at all, replied the wizard. It will all happen as quick as a wink." And that was the way it did happen. The cab horse gave a nervous start, and Zeb began to rub his eyes to make sure he was not asleep. For they were in the streets of a beautiful emerald green city, bathed in a grateful green light that was especially pleasing to their eyes, and surrounded by merry-faced people in gorgeous green and gold costumes of many extraordinary designs. Before them were the jewel-studded gates of a magnificent palace, and now the gates opened slowly as if inviting them to enter the courtyard, where splendid flowers were blooming and pretty fountains shot their silvery sprays into the air. Zeb shook the reins to rouse the cab-horse from his stupor of amazement, for the people were beginning to gather around and stare at the strangers. "Get up!" cried the boy, and at the word Jim slowly trotted into the courtyard and drew the buggy along the jeweled driveway to the great entrance of the royal palace. Chapter 15. Old Friends Are Reunited. Many servants dressed in handsome uniforms stood ready to welcome the new arrivals, and when the wizard got out of the buggy, a pretty girl in a green gown cried out in surprise, "Why, it's Oz, the wonderful wizard, come back again!" The little man looked at her closely, and then took both the maiden's hands in his and shook them cordially. "On my word," he exclaimed, "it's little Jellia Jam, as pert and pretty as ever." "Why not, Mr. Wizard?" asked Jellia, bowing low. "But I'm afraid you cannot rule the Emerald City as you used to, because we now have a beautiful princess whom everyone loves dearly." "And the people will not willingly part with her," added a tall soldier in a captain general's uniform. The wizard turned to look at him. "Did you not wear green whiskers at one time?" he asked. "Yes," said the soldier, "but I shaved them off long ago, and since then I have risen from a private to be the chief general of the royal armies." "That's nice," said the little man, "but I assure you, my good people, that I do not wish to rule the Emerald City," he added earnestly. "In that case you are very welcome," cried all the servants, and it pleased the wizard to note the respect with which the royal retainers bowed before him. His fame had not been forgotten in the land of Oz by any means. "Where's Dorothy?" inquired Zeb anxiously as he left the buggy and stood beside his friend, the little wizard. "She's with the Princess Ozma in the private rooms of the palace," replied Jellia Jam, "but she has ordered me to make you welcome and to show you to your apartments." The boy looked around him with wondering eyes. Such magnificence and wealth as was displayed in this palace was more than he had ever dreamed of, and he could scarcely believe that all the gorgeous glitter was real and not tinsel. "What's to become of me?" asked the horse uneasily. He had seen considerable of life in the cities in his younger days, and knew that this regal palace was no place for him. It perplexed even Jellia Jam for a time to know what to do with the animal. The Green Maiden was much astonished at the sight of so unusual a creature, for horses were unknown to this land. But those who lived in the Emerald City were apt to be astonished by queer sights, so after inspecting the cab horse and noting the mild look in his big eyes, the girl decided not to be afraid of him. "There are no stables here," said the wizard, "unless some have been built since I went away." We have never needed them before," answered Jellia, "for the sawhorse lives in a room of the palace, being much smaller and more natural in appearance than this great beast you have brought with you." "Do you mean that I am a freak?" asked Jim angrily. "Oh, no," she hastened to say. "There may be many more like you in the place you come from, but in Oz any horse but a sawhorse is unusual." This mollified Jim a little, and after some thought, the Green Maiden decided to give the cab horse a room in the palace, such a big building having so many rooms that were seldom in use. So Zeb unharnessed Jim, and several of the servants then led the horse around to the rear, when they selected a nice large apartment that he could have all to himself. Then Jellia said to the wizard, Your own room, which was back at the great throne room, has been vacant ever since you left. Would you like it again?" "Yes, indeed," returned the little man. It will seem like being at home again, for I lived in that room for many, many years." He knew the way to it, and a servant followed him carrying his satchel. Zeb was also escorted to a room, so grand and beautiful that he almost feared to sit in a chair or lie upon a bed, lest he might dim their splendor. In the closets he discovered many fancy costumes of rich velvet and brocades, and one of the attendants told him to dress himself in any of the clothes that pleased him, and to be prepared to dine with the princess and Dorothy in an hour's time. Opening from the chamber was a fine bathroom, having a marble tub with perfumed water. So the boy, still dazed by the novelty of his surroundings, indulged in a good bath, and then selected a maroon velvet costume with silver buttons to replace his own soiled and much worn clothing. There were silk stockings and soft leather slippers with diamond buckles to accompany his new costume, and when he was fully dressed, Zeb looked much more dignified and imposing than ever before in his life. "Hey, Maestro, you going to join me? We have a visitor." "Did you have a good nap?" "I have to continue reading. I can't spend all my time petting you." Oh, he just wanted to pet some pets so that his food would taste better. Yes, there we go. He was all ready when an attendant came to escort him to the presence of the princess. He followed bashfully and was ushered into a room more dainty and attractive than it was splendid. Here he found Dorothy seated beside a young girl so marvelously beautiful that the boy stopped suddenly with a gasp of admiration. But Dorothy sprang up and ran to seize her friend's hand, drawing him impulsively toward the lovely princess, who smiled most graciously upon her guest. Then the wizard entered, and his presence relieved the boy's embarrassment. The little man was clothed in black velvet, with many sparkling emerald ornaments decorating his breast, but his bald head and wrinkled features made him appear more amusing than impressive. Ozma had been quite curious to meet the famous man who had built the Emerald City and united the Munchkins, Gillikins, Quadlings, and Winkies into one people. So when they were all four seated at the table together, the princess said, "Please tell me, Mr. Wizard, whether you called yourself Oz after this great country, or whether you believed my country is called Oz after you. It is a matter that I have long wished to inquire about, because you are a strange race, and my own name is Ozma. No one, I am sure, is better able to explain this mystery than you." "That is true," answered the little wizard. "Therefore it will give me pleasure to explain my connection with your country. In the first place, I must tell you that I was born in Omaha, and my father, who was a politician, named me Oscar Zoroaster. Oh, goodness. Okay, are you ready? This name is insane. Oscar Zoroaster Fadrick Isaac Norman Henkel Emmanuel Ambrose Diggs. Oh, Diggs being the last name because he could think of no more to go before it. Taken together, it was a dreadfully long name to weigh down a poor innocent child, and one of the hardest lessons I ever learned was to remember my own name. When I grew up, I just called myself OZ because the other initials were Pinhead, and that spelled pinhead, which was a reflection of my intelligence. "Surely no one would blame you for cutting your name short," said Ozma sympathetically. "But didn't you cut it almost too short?" "Perhaps so," replied the wizard. When a young man, I ran away from home and joined a circus. I used to call myself a wizard and do tricks of ventriloquism." "What does that mean?" asked the princess. "Throwing my voice into any object I pleased, to make it appear that the objects were speaking instead of me. Also, I began to make balloon ascensions. On my balloon and on all the other articles I used in the circus, I painted the two initials OZ to show that those things belonged to me." One day my balloon ran away with me and brought me across the deserts to this beautiful country. When the people saw me coming from the sky, they naturally thought me some superior creature and bowed down before me. I told them I was a wizard and showed them some easy tricks that amused them, and when they saw the initials painted on the balloon, they called me Oz. Now I begin to understand, said the princess, smiling. At that time, continued the wizard, busily eating his soup while talking, there were 4 separate countries in this land, each one of the 4 being ruled by a witch. But the people thought my power was greater than that of the witches, and perhaps the witches thought so too, for they never dared oppose me. I ordered the Emerald City to be built just where the 4 countries cornered together, and when it was completed, I announced myself the ruler of the land of Oz, which included all the 4 countries of the Munchkins, the Gillikins, the Winkies, and the Quadlings. Over this land I ruled in peace for many years until I grew old and longed to see my native city once again. So when Dorothy was first blown to this place by a cyclone, I arranged to go away with her in a balloon, but the balloon escaped too soon and carried me back alone. After many adventures, I reached Omaha, only to find that all my old friends were dead or had moved away. So, having nothing else to do, I joined a circus again and made my balloon ascensions until the earthquake caught me. This is quite a history, said Ozma, but there is a little more history about the land of Oz that you do not seem to understand, perhaps for the reason that no one ever told you. Many years before you came here, this land was united under one ruler, as it is now, and the ruler's name was always Oz, which means in our language great and good, or if the ruler happened to be a woman, her name was always Ozma. But once upon a time 4 witches leagued together to depose the king and rule the 4 parts of the kingdom themselves. So when the ruler, my grandfather, was hunting one day, one wicked witch named Mombi stole me and carried him away, keeping him a close prisoner. When the witches divided up the kingdom and ruled then the witches divided up the kingdom and ruled the 4 parts of it until you came here. That was why the people were so glad to see you, and why they thought from your initials that you were their rightful ruler. But at that time, said the wizard thoughtfully, there were 2 good witches and 2 wicked witches ruling in the land. Yes, replied Ozma, because a good witch had conquered Mombi in the north, and Glinda the good had conquered the evil witch in the south, but Mombi was still my grandfather's jailer, and afterward my father's janitor. And afterward my father's jailer. When I was born, she transformed me into a boy, hoping that no one would ever recognize me and know that I was the rightful princess of the land of Oz. But I escaped from her and am now the ruler of my people. I'm very glad of that, said the wizard, and hope you will consider me one of your most faithful and devoted subjects. We owe a great deal to the wonderful wizard, continued the princess, for it was you who built this splendid Emerald City. Your people built it, he answered. I only bossed the job, as we say in Omaha. But you ruled it wisely and well for many years, said she, and made the people proud of your magical art. So as you are now too old to wander abroad and work in a circus, I offer you a home here as long as you live. You shall be the official wizard of my kingdom, and be treated with every respect and consideration. I accept your kind offer with gratitude, gracious princess, the little man said in a soft voice, and they could all see that teardrops were standing in his keen old eyes. It meant a good deal to him to secure a home like this. It is only a humbug wizard, though, said Dorothy, smiling at him. And that is the safest kind of wizard to have, replied Ozma promptly. Oz can do some good tricks, humbug or no humbug, announced Zeb, who was now feeling more at ease. He shall amuse us with his tricks tomorrow, said the princess. I have sent messengers to summon all of Dorothy's old friends to meet her and give her welcome, and they ought to arrive very soon now. Indeed, the dinner was no sooner finished than in rushed the Scarecrow to hug Dorothy in his padded arms and tell her how glad he was to see her again. The wizard was also most heartily welcomed in by the straw man, who was an important personage in the land of Oz. "How are your brains?" inquired the little humbug, as he grasped the soft, stuffed hands of his old friend. "Working finely," answered the Scarecrow. "I'm very certain, Oz, that you gave me the best brains in the world, for I can think with them day and night when all other brains are fast asleep." "How long did you rule the Emerald City after I left here?" was the next question. "Quite a while, until I was conquered by a girl named General Ginger. But Ozma soon conquered her, with the help of Glinda the Good, and after that I went to live with Nick Chopper the Tin Woodman." Just then a loud cackling was heard outside, and when a servant threw open the door with a low bow, a yellow hen strutted in. Dorothy sprang forward and caught the fluffy fowl in her arms, uttering at the same time a glad cry. "Oh, Billina," she said, "how fat and sleek you've grown." "Why shouldn't I?" asked the hen in a sharp, clear voice. "I live on the fat of the land, don't I, Ozma?" "You have everything you wish for," said the princess. Around Billina's neck was a string of beautiful pearls, and on her legs were bracelets of emerald. She nestled herself comfortably in Dorothy's lap until the kitten gave a snarl of jealous anger and leaped up with a sharp claw fiercely bared to strike Billina a blow. But the little girl gave the angry kitten such a severe cuff that it jumped down again without daring to scratch. "How horrid of you, Eureka!" cried Dorothy. "Is that the way you treat my friends?" "You have queer friends, seems to me," replied the kitten in a surly tone. "Seems to me the same way," said Billina scornfully, "if that beastly cat is one of them." "Look here," said Dorothy sternly. "I won't have any quarreling in the land of Oz, I can tell you. Everybody lives in peace here and loves everybody else. And unless you two, Billina and Eureka, make up and be friends, I'll take my magic belt and wish you both home again immediately. So there." They were both much frightened at the threat and promised meekly to be good, but it was never noticed that they became very warm friends for all of that. And now the Tin Woodman arrived, his body most beautifully nickel-plated, so that it shone splendidly in the brilliant light of the room. The Tin Woodman loved Dorothy most tenderly and welcomed with joy the return of the little old wizard. "Sir," said he to the latter, "I never can thank you enough for the excellent heart you once gave me. It has made me many friends, I assure you, and it beats as kindly and lovingly today as it ever did." "I'm glad to hear that," said the wizard. "I was afraid it would get moldy in that tin body of yours." "Not at all," returned Nick Chopper. "It keeps finely, being preserved in my airtight chest." Zip was a little shy when first introduced to these queer people, but they were so friendly and sincere that he soon grew to admire them very much, even finding some good qualities in the yellow hen. But he became nervous again when the next visitor was announced. "This," said Princess Ozma, "is my friend Mr. H.M. Wogglebug T.E., who assisted me one time when I was in great distress, and is now the Dean of the Royal College of Athletic Science." "Ah," said the wizard, "I'm pleased to meet so distinguished a personage. H.M., said the Wogglebug pompously, means highly magnified, and T.E. means thoroughly educated. I am, in reality, a very big bug, and doubtless the most intelligent being of all this broad domain." "How well you disguise it," said the wizard, "but I don't doubt your word in the least." "Nobody doubts it," replied the Wogglebug, and drawing a book from his pocket, the strange insect turned its back on the company and sat down in a corner to read. Nobody minded his rudeness, which might have seemed more impolite in one less thoroughly educated, so they straightway forgot him and joined in a merry conversation that kept them well amused until bedtime arrived. Chapter 16. Jim the Cab Horse. Jim the cab horse found himself in possession of a large room with a green marble floor and carved marble wainscoting, which was so stately in its appearance that it would have awed anyone else. Jim accepted it as a mere detail, and at his command the attendants gave his coat a good rubbing, combed his mane and tail, and washed his hooves and fetlocks. Then they told him dinner would be served directly, and he replied that they could not serve it too quickly to suit his convenience. First they brought him a steaming bowl of soup, which the horse eyed in dismay. "Take that stuff away," he commanded. "Do you take me for a salamander?" They obeyed at once, and next served a fine large turbot on a silver platter, with drawn gravy poured over it. "Fish!" cried Jim with a sniff. "Do you take me for a tomcat? Away with it!" The servants were a little discouraged, but soon they brought in a great tray containing 2 dozen nicely roasted quail on toast. "Well, well," said the horse, now thoroughly provoked, "do you take me for a weasel? How stupid and ignorant you are in the land of Oz, and that dreadful thing you feed upon. Is there nothing that is decent to eat in this palace?" The trembling servant sent for the royal steward, who came in haste and said, "What would your highness like for dinner?" "Highness!" repeated Jim, who was unused to such titles. "You are at least 6 feet high, and that is higher than any other animal in this country," said the steward. "Well, my highness would like some oats," declared the horse. "Oats? We have no whole oats," said the steward replied with much deference, "but there is any quantity of oatmeal, which we often cook for breakfast. Oatmeal is a breakfast dish," added the steward humbly. "I'll make it a dinner dish," said Jim. "Fetch it on, but don't cook it, as you value your life." You see, the respect shown the worn-out old cab horse made him a little arrogant, and he forgot he was a guest, never having been treated otherwise than as a servant since the day he was born, until his arrival in the land of Oz. But the royal attendants did not heed the animal's ill temper. They soon mixed a tub of oatmeal with a little water, and Jim ate it with much relish. Then the servants heaped a lot of rugs upon the floor, and the old horse slept on the softest bed he had ever known in his life. In the morning, as soon as it was daylight, he resolved to take a walk and try to find some grass for breakfast. So he ambled calmly through the handsome arch of the doorway, turned the corner of the palace, wherein all seemed asleep, and came face to face with the sawhorse. Jim stopped abruptly, being startled and amazed. The sawhorse stopped at the same time and stared at the other with its queer protruding eyes, which were mere knots in the log that formed its body. The legs of the sawhorse were 4 sticks driven into holes bored in the legs. Its tail was a small branch that had been left by accident, and its mouth a place chopped in one end of the body, which projected a little and served as a head. The end of the wooden legs were shod with plates of solid gold, and the saddle of the Princess Ozma, which was of red leather, sat with sparkling diamonds, which was strapped to the clumsy body. Jim's eyes stuck out as much as those of a sawhorse, and he stared at the creature with his ears erect and his long head drawn back until it rested against his arched neck. In this comical position, the 2 horses circled slowly around each other for a while, each being unable to realize that the singular thing might be which it now beheld for the first time. Then Jim exclaimed, "For goodness' sake, what sort of a being are you?" "I'm a sawhorse," replied the other. "Oh, I believe I've heard of you," said the cab horse, "but you are unlike anything that I expected to see." "I do not doubt it," said the sawhorse, with a tone of pride. "I am considered quite unusual." "You are indeed, but a rickety wooden thing like you has no right to be alive." "I couldn't help it," returned the other, rather crestfallen. "Ozma sprinkled me with a magic powder, and I just had to live. I know I'm not much account, but I'm the only horse in all the land of Oz, so they treat me with great respect." "You a horse?" Oh, not a real one, of course. There are no real horses here at all, but I'm a splendid imitation of one." Jim gave an indignant neigh. "Look at me," he cried. "Behold a real horse." The wooden animal gave a start and then examined the other intently. "Is it possible that you are a real horse?" he murmured. "Not only possible, but true," replied Jim, who was gratified by the impression he had created. "It is proved by my fine points. For example, look at the long hairs on my tail with which I can whisk away the flies." "The flies never trouble me," said the Sawhorse. "And notice my great strong teeth with which I nibble the grass." "It is not necessary for me to eat," observed the Sawhorse. "Also examine my broad chest, which enables me to draw deep, full breaths," said Jim proudly. "I have no need to breathe," returned the other. "No, you miss many pleasures," remarked the Cab-horse pityingly. "You do not know the relief of brushing away a fly that has bitten you, nor the delight of eating delicious food, nor the satisfaction of drawing a long breath of fresh, pure air. You may be an imitation of a horse, but you're a mighty poor one." "Oh, I cannot hope ever to be like you," sighed the Sawhorse. "But I am glad to meet at last a real horse. You are certainly the most beautiful creature I ever beheld." This praise won Jim completely. To be called beautiful was a novelty in his experience. Said he, "Your chief fault, my friend, is in being made of wood, and that I suppose you cannot help. Real horses like myself are made of flesh and blood and bones." "I can see the bones all right," replied the Sawhorse, "and they are admirable and distinct. Also I can see the flesh, but the blood I suppose is tucked away inside." "Exactly," said Jim. "What good is it?" asked the Sawhorse. Jim did not know, but he would not tell the Sawhorse that. "If anything cuts me," he replied, "the blood runs out to show where I am cut. You poor thing, cannot you even bleed when you are hurt?" "But I am never hurt," said the Sawhorse. "Once in a while I get broken up some, but I am easily repaired and put in good order again, and I never feel a break or a splinter in the least." Jim was almost tempted to envy the wooden horse for being unable to feel pain, but the creature was so absurdly unnatural that he decided he would not change places with it under any circumstances. "How did you happen to be shod with gold?" he asked. "Princess Ozma did that," was the reply, "and it saves my legs from wearing out. We've had a good many adventures together, Ozma and I, and she likes me." The Cab-horse was about to reply when suddenly he gave a start and a neigh of terror and stood trembling like a leaf. For around the corner had come two enormous savage beasts, treading so lightly that they were upon him before he was aware of their presence. Jim was in the act of plunging down the path to escape when the Sawhorse cried out, "Stop, my brother! Stop, Real Horse! These are friends and will do you no harm." Jim hesitated, eyeing the beasts fearfully. One was an enormous lion with clear, intelligent eyes, a tawny mane, bushy and well-kept, and a body like yellow plush. The other was a great tiger with purple stripes around his lithe body, powerful limbs, and eyes that showed through the half-closed lids like coals of fire. The huge forms of these monarchs of the forest and the jungle were enough to strike terror to the stoutest heart, and it was no wonder Jim was afraid to face them. But the Sawhorse introduced the stranger in a calm voice, saying, "This noble horse is my friend the Cowardly Lion, who is the valiant king of the forest, but at the same time a faithful vassal of Princess Ozma, and this is Hungry Tiger, the terror of the jungle, who longs to devour fat babies, but is prevented by his conscience from doing so. These royal beasts are both warm friends of little Dorothy, and have come to the Emerald City this morning to welcome her to our fairyland." Hearing these words, Jim resolved to conquer his alarm. He bowed his head with as much dignity as he could muster, toward the savage-looking beast, who in return nodded in a friendly way. "Is not the real horse a beautiful animal?" asked the Sawhorse admirably. "That is doubtless a matter of taste," returned the lion. "In the forest he would be thought ungainly because his face is stretched out and his neck is uselessly long. His joints, I notice, are swollen and overgrown, and he lacks flesh in his olden years. And dreadfully tough," added the hungry tiger in a sad voice. "My conscience would never permit me to eat so tough a morsel as the real horse." "I'm glad of that," said Jim, "for I also have a conscience, and it tells me not to crush in your skull with a blow of my powerful hoof." If he thought to frighten the striped beast by such language, he was mistaken. The tiger seemed to smile and wink one eye slowly. "You have a good conscience, friend horse," it said, "and if you attend to its teachings, it will do much to protect you from harm. Some day I will let you try to crush in my skull, and afterwards you will know more about tigers than you do now." "Any friend of Dorothy," remarked the Cowardly Lion, "must be our friend as well, so let us cease this talk of skull-crushing and converse upon more pleasant subjects. Have you breakfasted, Sir Horse?" "Not yet," replied Jim. "There is plenty of excellent clover, so if you will excuse me, I will eat now." "He's a vegetarian," remarked the tiger, as the horse began to munch the clover. "If I could eat grass, I would not need a conscience, for nothing could then tempt me to devour babies and lambs." Just then Dorothy, who had risen early and heard the voices of the animals, ran out to greet her old friends. She hugged both the lion and the tiger with eager delight, but seemed to love the king of beasts a little better than she did his hungry friend, having known him longer. By the time they had indulged in a good talk, Dorothy had told them all about the awful earthquake and her recent adventures. The breakfast bell rang from the palace, and the little girl went inside to join her human comrades. As she entered the great hall, a voice called out in a rather harsh tone, "What? Are you here again?" "Yes, I answered. Yes, I am," she answered, looking all around to see where the voice came from. "What brought you back?" was the next question, and Dorothy's eyes rested on an antlered head hanging on the wall just over the fireplace, and caught its lips in the act of moving. "Good gracious!" she exclaimed. "I thought you were stuffed." "So am I," replied the head. "So I am," replied the head. "But once in a time I was part of the Gump, which Ozma sprinkled with the powder of life, and I was then for a time the head of the finest flying machine that was ever known to exist, and we did many wonderful things. Afterward the Gump was taken apart, and I was put back on this wall, so I can still talk when I feel in the mood, which is not often." "It's very strange," said the girl. "What are you when you were first alive? What were you when you were first alive?" "That I have forgotten," replied the Gump's head, "and I do not think it is of much importance. But here comes Ozma, so I'd better hush up, for the princess didn't like me to chatter since she changed her name from Tip to Ozma." Just then the girlish ruler of Oz opened the door and greeted Dorothy with a good morning kiss. The little princess seemed fresh and rosy and in good spirits. "Breakfast is served, dear," she said, "and I am hungry, so don't let us keep it waiting a single minute." "Maestro, are you going to come into my lap, or are you just going to sit there looking at me expectantly?" "Come on, Pants. Is in my lap? Come on." I think he's enjoying story time. "Yes, I love you too. Come on." I'm not going to stop story time with you, as there's still more to go. Chapter 17. The 9 Tiny Piglets. After breakfast, Ozma announced that she had ordered a holiday to be observed through the Emerald City in honor of her visitors. The people had learned that their old wizard had returned to them, and all were anxious to see him again, for he had always been a rare favorite. So first there was to be a grand procession through the streets, after which the little old man was requested to perform some of his wizardries in the great throne room of the palace. In the afternoon there were to be games and races. The procession was very imposing. First came the Imperial Cornet Band of Oz, dressed in emerald velvet uniforms with slashes of pea green satin and buttons of immense cut emeralds. They played the national air called the Oz-Spangled Banner, and behind them were the standard bearers with the royal flag. This flag was divided into four quarters, being colored sky blue, another pink, a third lavender, and a fourth white. In the center was a large emerald green star, and all over the four quarters were sewn spangles that glittered beautifully in the sunshine. The colors represented the four countries of Oz and the green star of the Emerald City. Just behind the royal standard bearers came the Princess Ozma and her royal chariot, which was of gold encrusted with emeralds and diamonds set in exquisite designs. The chariot was drawn on this occasion by the Cowardly Lion and the Hungry Tiger, who were decorated with immense pink and blue bows. In the chariot rode Ozma and Dorothy, the former in splendid raiments and wearing her royal coronet, while the little canvas girl wore around her waist the magic belt she had once captured from the Gnome King. Following the chariot came the Scarecrow mounted on the Sawhorse, and the people cheered him almost as loudly as they did their lovely ruler. Behind him stalked with regular jerky steps the famous machine called Tick-Tock, who had been wound up by Dorothy for the occasion. Tick-Tock moved by clockwork and was made all of burnished copper. He really belonged to the Kansas girl, who had much respect for his thoughts after they had been properly wound and set going. But as the Copper Man would be useless in any place but a fairy country, Dorothy had left him in charge of Ozma, who saw that he was suitably cared for. There followed another band after this, which was called the Royal Court Band, because the members all lived in the palace. They wore white uniforms with real diamond buttons and played What is Oz Without Ozma very sweetly. Then came Professor Wogglebug with a group of students from the Royal College of Scientific Athletics. The boys wore long hair and striped sweaters and yelled their college yell every other step they took, to the great satisfaction of the populace, which was glad to have this evidence that their lungs were in good condition. The brilliantly polished Tin Woodman marched next at the head of the Royal Army of Oz, which consisted of 28 officers, from generals down to captains. There were no privates in the army because all were so courageous and skillful that they had been promoted one by one until there were no privates left. Jim and the buggy followed, the old cab horse being driven by Zeb, while the wizard stood up on the seat and bowed his bald head right and left in answer to the cheers of the people who crowded thick about him. Taken altogether, the procession was a grand success, and when it had returned to the palace, the citizens crowded into the great throne room to see the wizard perform his tricks. The first thing the little humbug did was to produce a tiny white piglet from underneath his hat and pretend to pull it apart, making two. This act he repeated until all the tiny piglets were visible, and they were so glad to get out of his pocket that they ran around in a very lively manner. The pretty little creatures would have been a novelty anywhere, so the people were as amazed and delighted at their appearance as even the wizard could have desired. When he had made them all disappear again, Ozma declared she was very sorry they were gone, for she wanted one of them to pet and play with. So the wizard pretended to take one of the piglets out of the hair of the princess, while really he slyly took it from his inside pocket. And Ozma smiled joyously as the creature nestled in her arms, and she promised to have an emerald-colored maid for its fat neck, and to keep the little squealer always at hand to amuse herself. Afterward, it was noticed that the wizard always performed his famous trick with 8 piglets, but it seemed to please the people just as well as if they had been 9 of them. In his little room back of the throne room, the wizard had found a lot of things he had left behind when he went away in the balloon, for no one had occupied the apartment in his absence. There was enough material there to enable him to prepare several new tricks which he had learned from some of the jugglers in the circus, and he had passed part of the night in getting them ready. So he followed the trick of the 9 tiny piglets, with several other wonderful feats that greatly delighted his audience, and the people did not seem to care a bit whether the little man was a humbug wizard or not, so long as he succeeded in amusing them. They applauded all his tricks, and at the end of the performance begged him earnestly not to go away again and leave them. "In that case," said the little man gravely, "I will cancel all my engagements before the crowned heads of Europe and America, and devote myself to the people of Oz, for I love you all so well that I can deny you nothing." After the people had been dismissed with this promise, our friends joined Princess Ozma in an elaborate luncheon in the palace, where even the tiger and the lion were sumptuously fed, and Jim, the cab horse, ate his oatmeal out of a golden bowl with 7 rows of rubies, sapphires, and diamonds set around the rim of it. In the afternoon they all went to a great field outside the city gates where the games were to be held. There was a beautiful canopy for Ozma and her guests to sit under and watch the people run races and jump and wrestle. You may be sure the folks of Oz did their best with such a distinguished company watching them, and finally Zeb offered to wrestle with the little Munchkin, who seemed to be the champion. In appearance he was twice as old as Zeb, for he had long pointed whiskers and wore a peaked hat with little bells all around the brim of it, which tinkled gaily as he moved. But although the Munchkin was hardly tall enough to come to Zeb's shoulder, he was so strong and clever that he laid the boy 3 times on his back with apparent ease. Zeb was greatly astonished at his defeat, and when the pretty princess joined her people in laughing at him, he proposed a boxing match with the Munchkin, to which the little Ozite readily agreed. But the first time that Zeb managed to give him a sharp box on the ears, the Munchkin sat down upon the ground and cried until the tears ran down his whiskers because he had been hurt. This made Zeb laugh in turn, and the boy felt comforted to find that Ozma laughed as merrily at her weeping subject as she had at him. Just then the Scarecrow proposed a race between the Sawhorse and the Cab Horse, and although all the others were delighted at the suggestion, the Sawhorse drew back, saying, "Such a race would not be fair." "Course not," added Jim with a touch of scorn. "Those little wooden legs of yours are not half as long as my own." "It isn't that," said the Sawhorse modestly, "but I never tire and you do." "Puh, bah!" replied Jim, looking with great disdain at the others. "Do you imagine for an instant that such a shabby imitation of a horse as you can run as fast as I?" "I don't know, I'm sure," replied the Sawhorse. "That is what we are trying to find out," remarked the Scarecrow. "The object of a race is to see who can win it, or at least that is why my excellent brains think." "Oh, hey, Bright. Yeah, we still have like a couple chapters left? Yeah." It's probably going to be another like half an hour. I'm glad you can make it. How was sleep? It was nice to be able to catch some of your stream. Excellent. Glad to hear it. I'm in the middle of the chapters, but I will reply at the end of the chapter. The object of a race is to see who can win it, or at least that is what my excellent brains think. "Once when I was young," said Jim, "I was a racehorse and defeated all who dared run against me. I was born in Kentucky, you know, where all the best and most aristocratic horses come from." "But you're old now, Jim," suggested Zeb. "Old? Huh, why, I feel like a colt today," replied Jim. "I only wish there was a real horse for me to race with. I'd show the people a fine sight, I can tell you." "And then why not race with the Sawhorse?" inquired the Scarecrow. "He's afraid," said Jim. "Oh, no," answered the Sawhorse. "I merely said it wasn't fair, but if my friend the real horse is willing to undertake the race, I am quite ready." So they unharnessed Jim and took the saddle off the Sawhorse, and the 2 queerly matched animals were stood side by side for the start. "When I say go," Zeb called to them, "you must dig out and race until you reach those 3 trees you see over yonder. Then circle round them and come back again. The first one that passes the place where the princess sits shall be named the winner. Are you ready?" "I suppose I ought to give the wooden dummy a good start of me," growled Jim. "Never mind that," said the Sawhorse. "I'll do the best I can." "Go!" cried Zeb, and at the word the two horses leaped forwards and the race was begun. Jim's big hoofs pounded away at a great rate, and although he did not look very graceful, he ran in a way to do credit to his Kentucky breeding. But the Sawhorse was swifter than the wind. Its wooden legs moved so fast that their twinkling could scarcely be seen, and although so much smaller than the cab horse, it covered the ground much faster. Before they had reached the trees, the Sawhorse was far ahead, and the wooden animal returned to the starting place and was being lustily cheered by the Ozites before Jim came panting up to the canopy where the princess and her friends were seated. I am sorry to record the fact that Jim was not only ashamed of his defeat, but for a moment lost control of his temper. As he looked at the comical face of the Sawhorse, he imagined that the creature was laughing at him. So in a fit of unreasonable anger, he turned around and made a vicious kick that sent his rival tumbling head over heels upon the ground and broke off one of its legs and its left ear. An instant later, the tiger crouched and launched its huge body all through the air, swift and resistless as a ball from a cannon. Yeah, resistless, okay. The beast struck Jim full on his shoulder and sent the astonishing cab horse rolling over and over amid shouts of delight from the spectators, who had been horrified by the ungracious act he had been guilty of. When Jim came to himself, he sat upon his haunches. He found the Cowardly Lion crouched on one side of him, and the Hungry Tiger on the other, and their eyes were glowing like balls of fire. "I beg your pardon, I'm sure," said Jim meekly. "I was wrong to kick the Sawhorse, and I am sorry I became angry at him. He has won the race, and won it fairly, but what can a horse of flesh do against a tireless beast of wood?" Hearing this apology, the tiger and the lion stopped lashing their tails and retreated with dignified steps to the side of the princess. "No one must injure one of our friends in our presence," replied the lion, and Zeb ran to Jim and whispered that unless he controlled his temper in the future, he would probably be torn to pieces. Then the Tin Woodman cut a straight and strong limb from a tree with its gleaming axe, and made a new leg and a new ear for the Sawhorse. And when they had been securely fastened in place, Princess Ozma took the coronet from her own head and placed it upon that of the winner of the race. Said she, "My friend, I reward you for your swiftness by proclaiming you Prince of Horses, whether of wood or of flesh, and hereafter all other horses in the land of Oz, at least, must be considered imitations, and you the real champion of your race." There was more applause at this, and then Ozma had the jeweled saddle replaced upon the Sawhorse, and herself rode the victor back to the city at the head of the grand procession. "I ought to be a fairy," grumbled Jim as he slowly drew the buggy home. "For to be just an ordinary horse in a fairy country is to be of no accounts whatever. It's no place for us, Zeb." "It's lucky we got here, though," said the boy, and Jim thought of the dark cave and agreed with him. Well, I hope you're having a good morning. Since we're between chapters, I can chat a bit. I hope you're having a good morning for you, Mr. Brightside. Oh, and I want to check. There was a little... I'm sorry, just checking on the Discord. There was a chat. There was a little message. Nice. So you got streams on in the background. I like that. I wish I could have streams on in the background as I work, but it's not really possible in retail. But yeah, I'm glad that that I could be here so you can have have something in the background. Oh, well. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Not quite possible in my line of work, sadly. But, you know. I'm glad that you do have work that you can do from home, though. That is really nice. Chapter 18. The Trial of Eureka the Kitten. Several days of festivity and merrymaking followed, for such old friends did not often meet, and there was much to be told and talked over between them, and many amusements to be enjoyed in this delightful country. Ozma was happy to have Dorothy beside her, for girls of her own age with whom it was proper for the princess to associate were very few, and often the youthful ruler of Oz was lonely for lack of companionship. It was the third morning after Dorothy's arrival, and she was sitting with Ozma and her friends in a reception room, talking over old times, when the princess said to her maid, "Please go to my boudoir, Jellia, and get the white piglet I left on the dressing table. I want to play with it." Jellia at once departed on the errand, and she was gone so long that they had almost forgotten her mission when the green-robed maiden returned with a troubled face. "The piglet is not there, your highness," said she. "Not there?" exclaimed Ozma. "Are you sure?" "I have hunted in every part of the room," the maid replied. "Was not the door closed?" asked the princess. "Yes, your highness, I am sure it was, for when I opened it, Dorothy's white kitten crept out and ran up the stairs." Hearing this, Dorothy and the wizard exchanged startled glances, for they remembered how often Eureka had longed to eat a piglet. The little girl jumped up at once. "Come, Ozma," she said anxiously. "Let us go ourselves in search for the piglet." So the two went to the dressing room of the princess and searched carefully in every corner and amongst the vases and baskets and ornaments that stood upon the pretty boudoir. But not a trace could they find of the tiny creature they sought. Dorothy was nearly weeping by this time, while Ozma was angry and indignant. When they returned to the others, the princess said, "There is little doubt that my pretty piglet has been eaten by that horrid kitten, and if that is true, the offender must be punished." "I don't believe Eureka would do such a dreadful thing," cried Dorothy, much distressed. "Go and get my kitten, please, Jellia, and we'll hear what she has to say about it." The green maiden hastened away, but presently returned and said, "The kitten will not come. She threatened to scratch my eyes out if I touched her." "Where is she?" asked Dorothy. "Under the bed in your own room," was the reply. So Dorothy ran to her room and found the kitten under the bed. "Come here, Eureka," she said. "I won't," replied the kitten in a surly voice. "Oh, Eureka, why are you so bad?" The kitten did not reply. "If you don't come to me right away," continued Dorothy, getting provoked, "I'll take my magic belt and wish you in the country of the Gurgles." "Why do you want me?" asked Eureka, disturbed by this threat. "You must go to Princess Ozma. She wants to talk to you." "All right," replied the kitten, creeping out. "I'm not afraid of Ozma, or anyone else." Dorothy carried her in her arms back to where the others sat in grieved and thoughtful silence. "Tell me, Eureka," said the princess gently, "did you eat my pretty piglet?" "I won't answer such a foolish question," asserted Eureka with a snarl. "Oh, yes, you will, dear," replied Dorothy. "The piglet is gone, and you ran out of the room when Jellia opened the door, so if you are innocent, Eureka, you must tell the princess how you came to be in her room, and what has become of the piglet." "Who accuses me?" asked the kitten defiantly. "No one," answered Ozma. "Your actions alone accuse you. The fact is that I left my little pet in my dressing room, lying asleep upon the table, and you must have stolen in without my knowing it. When next the door was open, you ran out and hid yourself, and the piglet was gone." "That's none of my business," growled the kitten. "Don't be impudent, Eureka," admonished Dorothy. "It is you who are impudent," said Eureka, "for accusing me of such a crime when you can't prove it except by guessing." Ozma was now greatly incensed by the kitten's conduct. She summoned her captain general, and when the long, lean officer appeared, she said, carry this cat away to prison and keep her in safe confinement until she is tried by law for the crime of murder." So the Captain General took Eureka from the arms of the now weeping Dorothy, and in spite of the kitten's snarls and scratches, carried it away to prison. "What shall we do?" asked the Scarecrow with a sigh, for such a crime had cast a gloom over all the company. "I will summon the court to meet in the throne room at 3 o'clock, replied Ozma. "I myself will be the judge, and the kitten shall have a fair trial." "What will happen if she is guilty?" asked Dorothy. "She must die," answered the princess. "9 times?" inquired the Scarecrow. "As many times as is necessary," was the reply. "I will ask the Tin Woodman to defend the prisoner. Because he has such a kind heart, I am sure he will do his best to save her, and the Woggle-Bug shall be the public accuser, because he is so learned that no one can deceive him." "Who will be the jury?" asked the Tin Woodman. "There ought to be several animals on the jury," said Ozma, "because animals understand each other better than we people understand them. So the jury shall consist of the Cowardly Lion, the Hungry Tiger, Jim the Cab-Horse, the Yellow Hen, the Scarecrow, the Wizard, Tick-Tock the Machine Man, the Sawhorse, and Zeb of Hugson's Ranch. That makes the 9 which the law requires, and all my people shall be admitted to hear the testimony." They now separated to prepare for the sad ceremony, for whenever an appeal is made to law, sorrow is almost certain to follow, even in a fairyland like Oz. But it must be stated that that the people of that land were generally so well behaved that there was not a single lawyer amongst them, and it had been years since any ruler had sat in judgment upon an offender of the law. The crime of murder being the most dreadful crime of all, the tremendous excitement prevailed in the Emerald City. The Wizard, when he returned to his own rooms, was exceedingly thoughtful. He had no doubt Eureka had eaten the piglet, but he realized that a kitten cannot be depended upon at all times to act properly, since its nature is to destroy small animals and even birds for food, and the tame cat that we keep in our houses today is descended from the wild cat of the jungle, a very ferocious creature indeed. The Wizard knew that if Dorothy's pet was found guilty and condemned to death, the little girl would be very unhappy. So, although he grieved over the piglet's sad fate as much as any of them, he resolved to save Eureka's life. Sending for the Tin Woodman, the Wizard took him into a corner and whispered, "My friend, it is your duty to defend the white kitten and try to save her. But I fear you will fail because Eureka has long wished to eat a piglet, to my certain knowledge, and my opinion is that she has been unable to resist the temptation. Yet her disgrace and death would not bring back the piglet, but only serve to destroy Dorothy, to make Dorothy unhappy. So I intend to prove the kitten's innocence by a trick." He drew from his inside pocket one of the 8 tiny piglets that was remaining and continued, "This creature you must hide in some safe place, and if the jury decides that Eureka is guilty, you must then produce this piglet and claim it is the one that was lost. All the piglets are exactly alike, so no one could dispute your word. This deception will save Eureka's life, and then we may all be happy again." "I do not like to deceive my friends," replied the Tin Woodman. "Still, my kind heart urges me to save Eureka's life, and I can usually trust my heart to do the right thing, so I will do as you say, my friend Wizard." After some thought, he placed the little pig inside his funnel-shaped hat, and then put the hat upon his head and went back to his room to think over his speech to the jury. "I must say these are marvelously well-behaved piglets. They remain hidden so well. Oh, sorry, I was just looking at something. My bad. Okay, I'm back. Chapter 19. The Wizard Performs Another Trick. At 3 o'clock, the throne room was crowded with citizens, men, women, and children, being eager to witness the great trial. Princess Ozma, dressed in her most splendid robes of state, sat in the magnificent emerald throne with her jeweled scepter in her hand and her sparkling coronet upon her fair brow. Behind her throne stood the 28 officers of her army and many officials of the royal household. At her right sat the queerly assorted jury, animals, animated dummies, and people, all gravely prepared to listen to what was said. The kitten had been placed in a large cage just before the throne, where she sat upon her haunches and gazed through the bars at the crowds around her with seeming unconcern. And now, at a signal from Ozma, the Woggle-Bug arose and addressed the jury. His tone was pompous, and he strutted up and down in an absurd attempt to appear dignified. "Your Royal Highness and fellow citizens," he began, "the small cat you see a prisoner before you is accused of the crime of first murdering and then eating our esteemed ruler's fat piglet, or else first eating and then murdering it. In either case, a grave crime has been committed which deserves a grave punishment." "Do you mean my kitten must be put in a grave?" asked Dorothy. "Don't interrupt, little girl," said the Woggle-Bug. "When I get my thoughts arranged in a good order, I do not like to have anything upset them or throw them into confusion." "If your thoughts were any good, you wouldn't become confused," remarked the Scarecrow earnestly. "My thoughts are always—" "This is a trial of thoughts, or is it of kittens?" demanded the Woggle-Bug. "It is a trial of one kitten," replied the Scarecrow, "but your manner is a trial to all of us." "Let the public accuser continue," called Ozma from her throne, "and I pray you do not interrupt him." "The criminal who now sits before the court, licking her paws," resumed the Woggle-Bug, "has long desired to unlawfully eat the fat piglet, which was no bigger than a mouse, and finally she made a wicked plan to satisfy her depraved appetite for pork. I can see her in my mind's eye." "What's that?" asked the Scarecrow. "I say I can see her in my mind's eye." "The mind has no eye," declared the Scarecrow. "It's blind." "Your Highness," cried the Woggle-Bug, appealing to Ozma, "have I a mind's eye, or haven't I?" "If you have, it is invisible," said the Princess. "Very true," returned the Woggle-Bug, bowing. "I say I see the criminal in my mind's eye, creeping stealthily into the room of our Ozma and secreting herself when no one was looking, until the Princess has gone away and the door was closed. Then the murderer was alone with her helpless victim, the fat piglet, and I see her pounce upon the innocent creature and eat it up. Are you still seeing with your mind's eye?" inquired the Scarecrow. "Of course, how else could I see it? And you know the thing is true, because since the time of that interview there is no piglet to be found anywhere." "I suppose if the cat had been gone instead of the piglet, your mind's eye would see the piglet eating the cat," suggested the Scarecrow. "Very likely," acknowledged the Woggle-Bug. "And now, fellow citizens and creatures of the jury, I assert that so awful a crime deserves death, and in the case of the ferocious criminal before you, who is now washing her face, the death penalty should be inflicted 9 times. There was great applause when the speaker sat down. Then the Princess spoke in a stern voice. "Prisoner, what have you to say for yourself? Are you guilty or not guilty?" "Why, that's for you to find out," replied Eureka. "If you can prove I'm guilty, I'll be willing to die 9 times, but a mind's eye is no proof, because the Woggle-Bug has no mind to see with." "Never mind, dear," said Dorothy. Then the Tin Woodman arose and said, "Respected jury and dearly beloved Ozma, I pray you not to judge this feline prisoner unfeelingly. I do not think the innocent kitten can be guilty, and surely it is unkind to accuse a luncheon of being a murder. Eureka is the sweet pet of a lovely little girl who we all admire, and gentleness and innocence are her chief virtues. Look at the kitten's intelligent eyes." Here Eureka closed her eyes sleepily. "Gaze at her smiling countenance." Here Eureka snarled and showed her teeth. "Mark the tender pose of her soft, padded little hands." Here Eureka bared her sharp claws and scratched at the bars of the cage. Would such a gentle animal be guilty of eating a fellow creature? No, 1,000 times no! "Oh, cut it short," said Eureka. "You've talked long enough. I'm trying to defend you, remonstrated the Tin Woodman. Then say something sensible, retorted the kitten. Tell them it would be foolish for me to eat the piglet because I had sense enough to know it would raise a row if I did. But don't try to make it out I'm too innocent to eat a fat piglet. If I could do it and not be found out, I imagine it would taste mighty good. Perhaps it would to those who eat, remarked the Tin Woodman. I myself, not being built to eat, have no personal experience in such matters. But remember that our great poet once said, to eat is sweet when hunger's seat demands a treat of savory meat. Actually, his remark was untrue because the Tin Woodman was once alive. Take this into consideration, friends of the jury, and you will readily decide that the kitten is wrongfully accused and should be set at liberty. When the Tin Woodman sat down, no one applauded him, for his arguments had not been very convincing, and few believed that he had proved Eureka's innocence. So for the jury, the members whispered to each other for a few minutes, and then they appointed the Hungry Tiger their spokesman. The huge beast slowly rose and said, Kittens have no consciences, so they eat whatever pleases them. The jury believes the white kitten, known as Eureka, is guilty of having eaten the piglet owned by Princess Ozma, and recommends that she be put to death in punishment of crime. The judgment of the jury was received with great applause, although Dorothy was sobbing miserably at the fate of her pet. The princess was just about to order Eureka's head chopped off with the Tin Woodman's axe when that brilliant personage once more arose and addressed her. Your Highness, said he, see how easily it is for a jury to be mistaken. The kitten could not have eaten your piglet, for here it is. He took off his funnel hat, and from beneath it produced a little tiny white piglet, which he held aloft that all might see it clearly. Ozma was delighted and exclaimed eagerly, Give me my pet, Nick Chopper! And all the people cheered and clapped their hands, rejoicing that the prisoner had escaped death and been proved to be innocent. As the princess held the white piglet in her arms and stroked its soft hair, she said, Let Eureka out of the cage, for she is no longer a prisoner. But our good friend, where did you find my missing pet, Nick Chopper? In a room of the palace, he answered. Justice, remarked the Scarecrow with a sigh, is a dangerous thing to meddle with. If you hadn't happened to find the piglet, Eureka would surely have been executed. Justice prevailed at last, said Ozma, for here is my pet, and Eureka is once more free. I refuse to be free, cried the kitten in a sharp voice, unless the wizard can do his trick with 8 piglets. If he can produce but 7, then this is not the piglet that was lost, but another one. Hush, Eureka, warned the wizard. Don't be foolish, advised the Tin Woodman, or you may be sorry for it. The piglet that belonged to the princess wore an emerald collar, said Eureka loudly enough for all to hear. So it did, remarked Ozma. This cannot be the one the wizard gave me. Of course not. He had 9 of them altogether, declared Eureka. I must say it was very stingy of him not to let me eat just a few, but now that this foolish trial is ended, I will tell you what really became of your pet piglet. At this, everyone in the room suddenly became quiet, and the kitten continued in a calm and mocking tone of voice. I will confess that I intended to eat the little pig for my breakfast, so I crept into the room where it was kept while the princess was dressing and hid myself under a chair. When Ozma went away, she closed the door and left her pet on the table. At once I jumped up and told the piglet not to make a fuss, for he would be inside of me in half a second, but no one can teach one of those creatures to be reasonable. Instead of keeping still so I could eat him comfortably, he trembled so with fear that he fell off the table into a big vase that was standing on the floor. The vase had a very small neck and spread out at the top like a bowl. At first the piglet stuck in the neck of the vase, and I thought I should get him after all, but he wriggled himself through and fell down into the deep bottom part, and I suppose he's there yet. All were astonished at this confession, and Ozma at once sent an officer to her room to fetch the vase. When he returned, the princess looked down the narrow neck of the big ornament and discovered her lost piglet, just as Eureka had said she would. There was no way to get the creature out without breaking the vase, so the Tin Woodman smashed it with his axe and set the little prisoner free. Then the crowd cheered lustily, and Dorothy hugged the kitten in her arms and told her how delighted she was to know that she was innocent. "But why didn't you tell us at first?" she asked. "It would have spoiled the fun," replied the kitten, yawning. Ozma gave the wizard back the piglet he had so kindly allowed Nick Chopper to substitute for the lost one, and then she carried her own into the apartments of the palace where she lived. And now, the trial being over, the good citizens of the Emerald City scattered to their homes, well contented with the day's amusement. Hi, are you getting into my lap, or are you just going to stare at me? Is this the last chapter? We're on the last chapter. All right. Chapter 20. Zeb returns to the ranch. Eureka was much surprised to find herself in disgrace, but she was, in spite of the fact that she had not eaten the piglet. For the folks of Oz knew the kitten had tried to commit the crime, and that only an accident had prevented her from doing so. Therefore, even the hungry tiger preferred not to associate with her. Eureka was forbidden to wander around the palace and was made to stay in confinement in Dorothy's room. So she began... Oh, thank you. I did, yes. This was... this piece of art was my first one where I started to play around with... what are they called? Filters? Not filters. Textures in GIMP. And... I was really pleased with it, so I'm glad that I can use it again for at least 2 more stories after that. So all of the art that you see on here, they are all done by me, as are all of the emotes. Dorothy was herself anxious to get home, so she promised Eureka they would not stay in the land of Oz much longer. The next evening, after the trial, the little girl begged Ozma to allow her to look in the enchanted picture, and the princess readily consented. She took the child to her room and said, "Make your wish, dear, and the picture will show you the scene you desire to behold." Then Dorothy found, with the aid of the enchanted picture, that Uncle Henry had returned to the farm in Kansas, and she also saw that both he and Aunt Em were dressed in mourning because they thought their little niece had been killed by the earthquake. "Really," said the girl anxiously, "I must get back as soon as possible to my own folks." Zeb also wanted to see his home, and although he did not find anyone mourning for him, the sight of Hugson's ranch in the picture made him long to get back there. "This is a fine country, and I like all the people that live in it," he told Dorothy. "But the fact is, Jim and I don't seem to fit into a fairyland, and the old horse has been begging me to go home again ever since he lost the race. So if you can find a way to fix it, I'll be much obliged to you." "Ozma can do it easily," replied Dorothy. "Tomorrow morning I'll go to Kansas, and you go to California." That last evening was so delightful that the boy will never forget it as long as he lives. They were all together, except Eureka, in the pretty rooms of the princess, and the wizard did some new tricks, and the scarecrow told stories, and the Tin Woodman sang a love song in a sonorous, metallic voice, and everybody laughed and had a good time. Then Dorothy wound up Tick-Tock, and he danced a jig to amuse the company, after which the Yellow Hen related some of her adventures with the Gnome King in the land of Ev. The princess served delicious refreshments to those who were in the habit of eating, and when Dorothy's bedtime arrived, the company separated after exchanging many friendly sentiments. Next morning they all assembled for the final parting, and many of the officials and courtiers came to look upon the impressive ceremonies. Dorothy held Eureka in her arms and bade her friends a fond goodbye. "You must come back again sometime," said the little wizard, and she promised she would if she found it possible to do so. "But Uncle Henry and Aunt need me to help them," she added, "so I can't ever be very long away from the farm in Kansas." Ozma wore the magic belt, and when she had kissed Dorothy farewell and had made her wish, the little girl and her kitten disappeared in a twinkling. "Where is she?" asked Zeb, rather bewildered by the suddenness of it. "Greeting her uncle and aunt in Kansas by this time," returned Ozma with a smile. Then Zeb brought out Jim, all harnessed to the buggy, and took his seat. "I'm much obliged for all your kindness," said the boy, "and very grateful to you for saving my life and sending me home again after all the good times I've had. I think this is the loveliest country in the world, but not being fairies, Jim and I feel we ought to be where we belong, and that's at the ranch. Goodbye, everybody." He gave a start and rubbed his eyes. Jim was trotting along the well-known road, shaking his ears and whisking his tail with a contented motion. Just ahead of them were the gates of Hugson's ranch, and Uncle Hugson now came out and stood with uplifted arms and a wide-open mouth, staring in amazement. "Goodness gracious, it's Zeb! And Jim, too!" he exclaimed. "Where in the world have you been, my lad?" "Why, in the world, Uncle," answered Zeb with a laugh. All right, we have gone almost a total hour over time, but I had fun. I don't mind that we went over it all. But because it was a longer stream, I'm not going to do a gaming stream after. I'm just going to go ahead and end it. So after I end the stream, I'll host somebody. Does anybody have a suggestion? Or actually, I could probably do a raid and then end the stream immediately. I'll try that. So does anybody have a suggestion of who we can raid? I'll see if any of the people I follow are on. There we go. Thanks you too, Corel. Thanks so much to everybody for hanging out with me. Let's see. We've got Squid Sub, we've got Resonum. We can raid Honey Crossing, I think. Okay, well, I'm going to raid somebody new. So it looks like Honey Crossing is playing Animal Crossing, which, you know, it's nice, chill, fun game. So, oops. So we'll do our story raid. Thanks again for hanging out with me. I will let you know what our viewer average is when I find out. I'll see you next time. Next story time is tomorrow. We're going to start The Hound of the Baskervilles, 2 p.m. Pacific time. Until then, have a good night. Bye.